I'm Mr. Ghost. This channel is new, but the nightmares are just beginning. If you enjoy true horror, consider subscribing, and let's dive into the darkness. When I was in 8th grade, something unexplainable happened to my best friend Gerald. Like any other summer night, he came to my house to sleep over. Outside, mosquitoes buzzed, rain drizzled, and frogs croaked. The fragrance of raindrops was among my favorite sensations, so I kept the window open. My room was upstairs, far away from my parents, so we were always noisy. At around 11 p.m., my older brother Sam agreed to take us to Taco Bell. Dude, seriously, you're just getting water? I ask. Come on, dude. You know I'm not allowed to drink soda. Gerald says, looking concerned. Your parents aren't here. It's all right, says my brother, putting his hand on Gerald's shoulder. He then motions to Dr. Pepper on the soda machine. Gerald shakes his head and refuses. I wish I could go back and force him to pick a soda instead. There's no telling if it would have even made a difference. But these thoughts persist. That was the last time I'd ever go to Taco Bell. Can't bring myself to go back after what happened, having since cut off anything that serves as a reminder of that night. After enjoying our tacos, Sam drove us back home, and we hung out for a bit before Sam called it a night, saying he was tired. What that really meant was, he was going to his room to call his girlfriend. Naturally, Gerald and I headed up to my room for our usual COD zombies. The flickering glow of my ancient television rested on our faces as we plowed through zombies. Unable to handle only getting to round 10 5 times in a row, we shut off the TV and crawled under our respective covers. Of course, we continued to stay up late into the night, discussing girls in our class, mostly who had the nicest ass. Gerald rattles his near-empty ice water cup in his hand as he speaks. You can toss your drink over there if you're finished. Besides, kinda gross to leave it out all night. I say, hey, it's fine, he said as he sat it down on the nightstand beside him. Fine. I'm just telling you. My mom always gets on to me for leaving cups out. He nodded, looking back. God, I wish I had said more. If only I had just made him throw away that cup. Not long after, Gerald and I both drifted to sleep, mid-conversation. It's 4 a.m. I wake up to unsettling noises, a horrific hybrid of wheezing and snoring. Its presence sent goosebumps across every inch of my body, just thinking of it now. My eyes are welling up with tears. What's wrong? I called out, still half asleep, jumping out of my bed towards Gerald's sleeping bag. His face was losing color, and he was trying to say something, holding a cup in his now shaking hand. Blue veins bulged across his face like running rivers. Vehemently, he regained his composure and spoke. Something sits in the cup, he said, now sweating immensely. I woke up thirsty, so I grabbed the cup to have a drink. Oh God. It swam into my throat. It had legs. It sits moving around in my stomach. I stared in disbelief. That couldn't be right. How would something alive get into his cup like that? It even had the lid still on. Still remains a mystery. Gross as it is, at first I thought it might have been a cockroach. Now, I really wish that were the case. Something told me he was serious. I'd never seen him this way in our many years of friendship. He looked frozen, like someone who had just been caught doing something wrong. What? How? I couldn't even think straight. I watched on with absolute disgust, as I could now see his stomach writhing under the covers. Before I could react, he pulled himself out of the sleeping bag and darted towards the window. It was open, of course, but it didn't matter either way. He broke right through the glass. I still remember the sound when he hit the driveway. His body vanished. By the time I made my way to the window, he was long gone. The local police had a search party, looking for weeks. Not a trace. I don't know if that thing caused him to jump, or if he couldn't stand it swimming around in his body. I shudder writing this. Every night I have nightmares, and I fear I'll never stop having them. The recurring ones are the worst, especially the one where I wake up to Gerald standing beside my bed, vomiting out blood and organs. To this day, I boil the water I drink, and I only drink from translucent cups. I doubt it helps, but I'm not taking any chances. But 4 months later, they found his body. This poor group of kids, geocaching in the woods, found his bones arranged into one enormous pile. Everything else was gone. They were traumatized. My nightmares persist too. My most recent one involving me watching Gerald spit up his bones one by one. Today, I went for a stroll with my dog Bella, took her to the usual spot, because I prefer the isolation. Pine cones littered the forest canopy beneath my feet. Everything was normal. Until I smelled it, this horrific stench that permeated the forest air around me. It made my eyes water, and I started gagging. The sound that came after was awful. It was this wheezing noise. Familiarity set in. I panicked. My heart beat at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Bella sensed something was up too. She started growling. Now the sound came from behind me. I slowly craned my neck to see. I wish I did not do that. Imagine how a person looks when they're missing their bones and all their internal organs. It's not a pleasant sight. A rotten husk of flesh somehow crawling towards me. Gasping for air. The wheezing. The stench. I couldn't stand it as it inched closer and closer to me. It attacked all my senses. My body didn't know how to react. I began to shut down just like that night Gerald disappeared. I didn't stay to discover its intentions. I'm unsure if that was still the same Gerald, or that creature controlling his brain. But either way, I will not be sleeping tonight. Not ever. I've decided to relocate. Unbelievable that I've continued living in this godforsaken town after everything. This evening I brushed my teeth as usual. As I stared into the mirror, trying to grasp what I had seen today, I reached for the clear cup on my bathroom counter and rinsed out my mouth. I wish I never did. Jamming my hand into my mouth, I attempt to stop it before it's too late. To no avail. With seemingly just seconds to react, I try to weigh my options. My frantic decision leads me to lock myself in the bathroom. Every piece of furniture that would fit is now pressed up against the door. I can feel my heart pounding all the way in my stomach. Imagine the sharpest stomach pain you felt. Then multiply that by 40 as I writhe on the cold tile floor. The familiar whirring of the garage door briefly shakes the house. I hear the front door pop open. My mom is home. Hello and welcome to another episode of Shadows and Secrets. I'm your host Lenora Black. A female voice speaks into a desk microphone. Today we are looking into the mysterious disappearances and murders of the Ashcraft estate. Eerie music plays in the background as she continues. The Ashcraft estate sits high in the ominous mountains of Dorstead Rise, where the first murder was found in 1836. A body of an unidentifiable 28-year-old female was found at the bottom of the grand staircase. The design modeled after the grand staircase at Blickling Hall. Could this have cursed it in some way? Lenora leaned on her desk, elbows propped up as she got closer to the microphone. The bodies of each victim were always found in unusual places of the estate, and in odd positions, almost as if they were posing for a painting for Jacques-Louis David, the artist behind the death of Marat. She leans back looking up at the ceiling. Which comes to my special announcement. She smiled. I will be moving into the Ashcraft estate. I'm hoping to solve these murders and disappearances. I hope you will wish me good luck as I continue to update you during the process. This has been Lenora Black, your host of Shadows and Secrets, signing off. She took off her headphones, placing them down. Lenora stopped the recording and had to admit she was most definitely nervous. Who wouldn't be? After all, she was going to be living in a place where people had died or disappeared. Lenora looked at the packed-up boxes, knitting her brows in tired frustration, exhaling a sigh. It was time to call the movers. By the time Lenora was on the road, she was sure that Move Hive was already halfway there, trying to obey traffic laws to get to the estate. Lenora didn't want to be pulled over. If that occurred, it'd put her further behind schedule. Passing the signs for the Dorstead Rise Mountains, She gripped the steering wheel, knowing there was no turning back now. From here it was a straight shot to Ashcraft Estate. Lenora was expecting a winding road that twisted around to the top. Instead, it was up various hills one after the other, then through an open metal gate. When the Ashcraft Estate came into view, she let out an audible gasp. The estate was breathtaking with its brick, stone veneer siding and prairie windows. Who knew that such a beautiful place was full of so much pain and grief? Parking behind the moving van, Lenora got out. Walking up to its window, she peered in, but saw no one. Where did they go? Lenora had the only key to get inside. Did they by chance leave it here in a hurry? Clicking her tongue, Lenora saw him digging the keys out of her purse. She walked towards the front door, keys in hand, and unlocked it. Pushing it open, Lenora stepped inside. Feeling around, she found a light switch, flipping it on. Above her, lights flickered to life, even if they were dim. Shutting a white oak door, her heels clicked on marble flooring as she crossed the room towards the foyer. The air felt heavy and smelled of mothballs and mildew. As she stood there, Lenora closed her eyes, taking in the atmosphere. Something about this place was off. If there were too many presences together in one place, all of them trying to find an exit, but were being kept here. Whatever it was keeping them here had to be the one behind it all. At least that was one of her theories. That instead of a killer, that it was a malevolent force which murdered them. Leaving the foyer, Lenora searched for a room to stay in. She would wait till morning and bring her belongings inside. Finding a room with an ensuite, Lenora settled in. Going to sleep. During the night she dreamed of walking through one of the many halls. It felt oddly bigger than it had when walked inside. Or had she gotten smaller? Regardless, she kept moving forward. Looking at her hand, Lenora lifted a lantern which lit the way. She took soft, careful steps, not wanting to make a sound, fearing if Lenora did it would awaken or alert someone. Her shuddering breath showed how cold it was. Wooden floorboards creaked under bare feet, walking on a faded floral rug runner, leading down a hallway to her right. At the end, where she was walking, stood someone. When raising her lantern and the light shone on them, it didn't feel right. Lenora willed herself to turn back, but her legs kept moving forward. Getting closer and closer, the face became more visible to her. Before seeing it clearly, she woke up in a cold sweat, rubbing her shaky hands over her face. What she did get to see of that person was dark circles, pale lifeless irises and sunken cheeks. The scent of death was heavy in the air. Their heavy stare on her weighed her down. That was when she woke up. If she hadn't, would that have meant death for her? Getting out of bed, Lenora walked into the ensuite to splash water onto her face. Drying her face with a towel, she looked up into the mirror, stumbling backwards in surprise. Instead of her own reflection staring back at her, it was a little girl, the one who she believed to be seeing through the eyes of. They stared at each other for a while. Then the little girl wrote on the other side of the fogged-up glass. Lenora cautiously stepped closer, reading the message. "He will be after you soon. Let me help." Who exactly was this? He she was talking about. Did she mean the cloaked figure? Lenora gulped, licking her dry lips. She knew that this would be difficult to do on her own. Lenora nodded, accepting the help which had been offered to her. The ghost of the girl then wrote another message, telling Lenora to find the study. There should be some useful information on the person she saw. She wasn't sure how this would help, but Lenora agreed to go look. The study was covered in cobwebs with thick layers of dust on the books, shelves, and desk. Walking over to the wooden desk, Lenora began looking through some documents. Glancing over them, there wasn't much to go off until she found an incident report. On April 13th, 1840, the body of Ashcraft Estate's gardener was found face down in the fountain. This was around early morning during winter, so the water was practically frozen. He was found wearing a dark cloak with the hood up. Death was caused by blunt force trauma to the back of the head. When they removed his body, it was still warm. He hadn't been dead long, as the blood also clotted, nor did it have time to drip into the water. Lenora wondered if the body had been moved there. Where had Ashcraft's gardener been killed before being placed inside the fountain? It was like playing a game of Clue. Since there was no murder weapon found, it would be hard to figure out who did it. Why the gardener? Under the coroner's report was a file dated December 5th, 1836. Opening it up, Lenora read the report. In the dead of night, a housekeeper reported screaming and sounds of a struggle from an upstairs bedroom. Around midnight, the same housekeeper found the dead body of a 28-year-old woman at the bottom of the stairs. Rope burn marks were found around her neck. The person was identified as the daughter of an Ashcraft employee. Lenora lowered the file in her hands. Could she have been related to the gardener? The door to the study creaked, causing her to look up. Nothing was there, but she felt as if someone was watching her. The presences stood there for a while before slamming the door shut, causing Lenora to jump. What was that? Not that she could normally see all spirits in the first place. This one didn't want to be seen. Part of Lenora wanted to go after it while her common sense screamed no. Laying the file down next to the other report, she compared them. If he was indeed her father, he must have found out who her murderer was. In turn, that person must have silenced him. Lenora looked through the rest of the desk. She was looking for something, anything to give her a hint. Maybe information about the owner of the estate, or another death that was recorded. When Lenora came across a locked drawer, she grabbed the letter opener and popped it open. Inside was a bloody paperweight and a rope. These are without a doubt the murder weapons. If she had to guess, the very first owner of Ashcraft must have been the one to kill the young woman and her father, the gardener. Then the spirits must have gotten back at him by taking his daughter's life, along with the rest of his family. Anyone else who owned this house or came to investigate became cursed, thus ending their lives one after another. How could Lenora stop the gardener and his daughter from killing more people? She couldn't exactly bring the old Ashcraft owner to justice, since they probably already got him, unless the man escaped before they could. If that was the case, then she would have to gather all the evidence so she could start a posthumous trail. All she had to do was gather the murder weapons and the coroner's reports. Taking off her robe, she used to pick up the items in the drawer and tied it up. With the bundle in one arm, Lenora picked up the 2 files on the desk. She made her way to the study door and opened it. Looking down each end of the hallway, Lenora swiftly walked down the right side, making her way to the bedroom. She needed to call someone. But who? Lenora was not particularly close to anyone. Maybe the realtor? Digging through her purse, she found a business card for the man who sold her the house. Picking up her phone from the nightstand, she dialed the number and waited as it rang. The sound of a groggy sigh emitted from the other end. Miss Black, do you have any idea what time it is? I apologize, Mr. White, but I don't know who else to turn to. Then, what is the issue? I believe I figured out who the murderer of Ashcraft Estate is. There was a brief silence between the two. Mr. White, stay right where you are, Miss Black, and I will be right there. The call ended, and Lenora stared at her phone screen. An echoing sound of someone knocking on glass made her turn to look at the vanity. The little girl motioned to her before writing a message on the glass. Don't trust him. She made her way over to the vanity. Why shouldn't I trust him? Lenora questioned. The little girl frowned and answered, that man isn't who he appears to be. Could it be that this man was the late Ashcraft himself? Anxiety filled her mind as it raced with thoughts about what to do next. Lenora needed to get out to somewhere safe, a place that man didn't know about. Looking at the little girl in the mirror, she asked, do you have a favorite hiding place? The little girl's face brightened, nodding. Let me show you the way. The hiding place that the little girl had took Lenora to is the entrance to a crawl space. Taking a shaky breath, she slipped inside, making her way through. It began as a narrow space and opened. Using her phone's flashlight, she could see cobwebs and wires. A few items littered the floor that looked like they belonged to a child. This must have been where the little girl used to come play by herself. Walking through a bit more, Lenora could hear the front door open. Was the Mr. White here already? He should have been further away, at least an hour. Miss Black, I'm here. Where are you? He asked, walking into the foyer, something hidden behind his back. She peeked through the cracks in the walls and lowered her phone light. Was he here to kill her? Now, what Lenora knew, he was the one who killed the gardener and his daughter. He was going to silence her for good. She had to keep moving because the longer Lenora waited around, the closer he would get to finding her. As she rounded the corner, Lenora stopped dead in her tracks at what she saw before her. There, slumped in the corner of the room, a piece of its skull cracked, was a skeleton in a yellow dress. Blonde hair was still attached to its scalp. Lenora covered a hand over her mouth in shock. Had Mr. White hurt his own daughter for being witness to of the murders he committed? Like TV static. The little girl appeared next to her own skeleton and looked up at Lenora sullenly. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she told the little girl, who motioned down another path of the crawl space. "If you keep going that way, you will see an exit that leads outside a hole in the side of the house with a rose bush blocking it." Lenora nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, and with her items in tow she went the way that was shown to her. After walking for a bit, she was met with a rose bush and a hole in the side of the house. Crawling on all fours she went through, noticing that the door was left wide open. Lenora took this opportunity to shut it. Using something nearby, she blocked the door from being open. Running up to her car, she noticed the tires were slashed along with the moving truck. Going over to Mr. White's car, she tried the handle, opening it up, and searched for the keys. Banging on the front door made her jump as she saw the keys in the tiny tray in front of the gear shift. Pressing the push button, Lenora started the car and backed up. Mr. White cursed as he lifted the engineer's hammer into his hands and began smashing through the door. A wet hand placed itself onto his shoulder, and then another. Mr. White slowly turned, looking at the decaying face of his gardener, who screamed into his face before throwing him. As he hit the stairs, Mr. White looked up where the gardener's daughter stood, her neck and limbs twisted at unnatural angles, letting out a pained wail. Eyes widening, the man crawled away on all fours until he was right in front of his own daughter. "Barry's sweetheart." Mr. White smiled until he saw her pick up the hammer that he dropped from his hands when the gardener threw him. Iris raised it high above her head before letting it slam down into his head. A sickening wet crunch echoed in the air, followed by a thick squelching splatter, sending red chunks flying against the floor and nearby wall. Lenora gripped the steering wheel tightly as she focused on the road. She would stop in at a hotel to rest for the night and call the police in the morning. Hello and welcome to another episode of Shadows and Secrets. I'm your host, Lenora Black. Today I want to talk to you about my experience while living in the Ashcraft estate and the mysterious realtor Mr. White. For the first time, I will be taking live callers. Caller number 1, you're on the air. There was a silent pause, so she laughed it off. No need to be shy. Who are you and where are you from? There was a crackling on the other end. Hello, Miss Black. Lenora froze. It couldn't be. He was dead. She was sure of it. Who's this? You know exactly who I am, Miss Black. I do hope you will come visit soon. Deep within an ancient wood of lofty silver fir, I found a grave. Time had weathered away the name, but there in the shallow recesses grew the striking violet lichen. There is a cure, a terrible cure, one that rattles and twists your bones, the old woman said. You need only find the lichen that seeks the dead. And so, I did. I scraped it from the somber stone and stored it in my pouch, eager to return to my bedridden sister in the hut of that old hag. The pox had claimed her skin. For weeks I watched as she writhed in agony, begging for reprieve, but nothing I dared give her would suffice. Take me to the witch, she said one night. Through pain-induced delirium, the witch of the wood knows the way, the wordling way of old. Like all children, I knew the tale. I knew to stay out of that wood, but as I looked at the crumpled form of my kin, her eyes pale and hair black with sweat, I found no strength to deny her. Woven from twisted branches and covered in moss, the old woman's hut lay in a small forest clearing, where the fog saw fit to settle. Not a bird sang here. The only sound was the cracking of a meager fire and the humming of the old women who stoked it. Did you bring it, child? The old woman said. I think so, I replied. And the gold? You'll get the gold when she's better. It was a lie, of course. We did not have 2 pennies to rub together, much less her well-known fee. Stooped over the fire, she held back a knobbled hand. Quick, boy. The lichen. It must boil for an hour. And the girl has little time. In the corner, my sister slept, her breath ragged and slow. Does it truly work? I asked, handing over the precious plant. If you are strong enough. And if you are not? The old woman turned. Her face was wrinkled and dirt had long settled in the creases. Gone was any remnant of beauty, except for her eyes like sapphires in starlight. As I said, it's a terrible cure. I waited at the foot of the bed as the woman prepared the draught, dabbing a damp cloth on my sister's brow. Stay with me, I prayed. She had been so full of life, which is the type of thing that is always said. But it was true. She loved climbing a twisted pine or dipping her toes in the ember flow while I swam. Never have I known someone so kind. And even though she detested spiders on the principle of having far too many legs, she would cup them with her hands and shoo them outside. I don't think she would approve of this cure. There's magic in spider legs, my child, the old woman said as she reached for a shelf. Magic and chaos both. Nestled deep in the shelf was a glass jar containing the biggest spider I'd ever seen. It was a shiny black all over, except for the pale blue dot on its belly. Have you ever watched how they walk? How their spindly limbs snap to and fro, never moving, just appearing in a new position. Only evil things move like that. And make no mistake, child, this pox is evil too. But what is one malady to another? And with that, she opened the jar and yanked off a leg. Sent into a frenzy, the poor creature jolted and scrambled helplessly along the glass walls of its prison. And what does the lichen do? I asked. Is it evil as well? The old woman dropped the spider leg into the bubbling cup she held. No, not evil, she said, as she approached the bed. The pox seeks to corrupt all life, and what is more alive than a plant that blooms in death? It needs only a passageway. She handed me the cup. Have her drink deep, child. She must drink it all. I lifted the foul-smelling concoction to my sister's lips. As soon as the first drops touched her tongue, her eyes shot open. She struggled, sputtering and gagging, but I ran my fingers through her hair to calm her. It will make you better, I said. You have to trust me. The more I poured, the more panic set into her features. By the final drops, she was fighting me off her with all the feeble strength she had left, screaming my name, begging for me to stop. It hurts, US, said a voice that was not hers. It was deep and guttural. You still kill her. It shouted. You still kill hers. Both. Fool. Every last drop, the old woman said, rushing to my side and tilting the cup more. Pay it no mind. Stop. We'll let her live, we swear. The voice begged. We swear on the nameless one. The last drop fell onto her trashing tongue. And then there was silence. I waited without breathing for a sign of life. Anything, any hint or whisper of movement. But she did not stir. She was gone. I am sorry, my child. The old woman placed her shriveled hand on my trembling shoulder. She was too far gone. My eyes blurred with anger as bitter tears streamed down my cheeks. You said save her. I said it was a terrible cure. The witch said sternly, and now you must go. But first, my gold. She held out her other hand as her fingers dug into my arm. Get off, I screamed, batting away her arm. I have no gold. I have nothing. Very well. From within her cloak, she drew a cruel-looking blade. There are other things you can give me. An eye, perhaps. Many things call for an eye. I backed to the wall. There was no way out. She stood between me and the doorway. Come now, child. I'll make it quick, she said as she stepped ever closer. Stay away from me, you witch, I pleaded. Don't touch me. Please. Snap. The sound stopped us both. From the bed came a horrid noise, like branches breaking in a storm. silhouetted by the orange glow of a dying fire. My sister arose. Long and emaciated were her many legs, and her head hung backward, 8 unblinking eyes with a violet glow. No, that's impossible. But that was all she got out before my sister lunged. In a ravenous frenzy she devoured the witch, ripping sinewy flesh from bone and painting the humble hut red. Sarah, my sister, paused her feeding at the sound of my timid voice. Her limbs shambled about like a newborn deer as she dragged her blood-soaked hair across the floor, and in that moment, as I looked over her pitiful pox-covered flesh and into soulless eyes, I knew she was truly gone. I sprinted for the door, and as I tore through the woods I could hear it give chase. It wailed like a mourning lover, and the pounding of its legs echoed through the trees as I reached the forest's edge. Plunging into the frigid waters of the ember flow, I swam towards home with all the strength I had left. I crawled up the bank, shivering and coughing, and when I looked back it was watching from the other side. It dipped a tentative leg in the water and quickly pulled it back. Then, with frightening speed, it ran off into the murky darkness of the woods. I never went back to that wood. I never went looking for her, but she's out there. That much is certain. Some nights I hear her screams on the wind, though the doctor says it's all in my head. If you're ever in the woods, and you hear many legs, make for the river. She never did learn to swim. It all began with a bright light, then a deafening roar. All it took was that, for my home to disappear. My home wasn't the biggest village. There were maybe 100 of us, but as a newly built village it felt like we were doing okay. My tribe was originally hunters, before one of our elders learned about the best way to get food: just grow your own. This allowed us to finally set up permanent homes, instead of having to move around constantly. Even though growing food was tough, and honestly pretty boring, we were all happy with finally settling down. We had even heard of other tribes similar to us doing the same. We sent envoys to these other tribes, seeing if they needed help or wanted to trade with us. Anything to make life a little easier. I was sent to one of these other tribes that had just established their own community. When we saw them in the sky, I had just finished my negotiations, when suddenly the tribe's leader and I heard terrified screaming and panicked whispers coming from outside of the leader's hut. We both rushed outside to see what the issue was, thinking maybe a wild beast had broken through the community's newly built wall. As soon as I stepped out of the hut, I stopped dead in my tracks. There in the sky were these things, like nothing I had ever seen before. They seemed to shine in the light as they hovered in the air. These massive things hovered above the community menacingly, slowly creeping towards us, slowly blocking out the light. We watched in horror as suddenly these smaller things dropped off the giant behemoth in the sky. We saw as fire seemed to shoot off the bottoms of these things as they shot off into different directions. There were hundreds, maybe even thousands of the smaller creatures falling off the behemoth that seemed to take up the entire sky now. I slowly started to panic. What were these things? Did my home know about this? Were they safe? I needed to warn my home about these monstrous creatures that just seemed to appear in the sky. I looked around me, at all of the looks of terror, panic, even some grim acceptance as I slowly turned and ran for the community's gate, trying to run to my home as quickly as possible. I ran as fast and as hard as I could, trying to will the distance to my home to shorten itself. I had run for a long time, feeling my fear and panic rise as time went by. Was everyone alive? Were those creatures at my home too? Or just at the other community? I ran harder and faster. I was about to reach my home. It was just over the next hill when suddenly it happened. Another massive behemoth suddenly appeared in the sky, seemingly appearing from nothing. I estimated it was settled right over my home. I stopped and waited for those small creatures to detach themselves from the behemoth, so I could gauge a good hiding spot from them. That never happened though. As I looked at the behemoth waiting, I instead suddenly was blinded by a great flash of light. It was so bright, it felt as if I was staring directly into a fire, and it was causing my eyes themselves to melt. I let out a shriek of pain as I fell to my knees. With myself being blinded, I was unprepared for what happened next. A great and sudden rush of wind hit me. It was so strong that it flung me back onto the ground and caused me to roll for a short distance. Following the wind there was a deafening roar. This sound caused me even more pain, as it felt like my head was going to explode from the sound. After a short time, the roar seemed to soften before dying out. The wind seemed to stop, and I slowly waited for my eyesight to return. I felt pain from being thrown back by the wind, and my eyes and head were killing me. After another amount of time, I slowly gained my vision again. I saw that the behemoth was still in the sky, but now it was different. On the bottom of it, these two slabs were open, pointing towards the ground. I could only assume that it was its mouth, and it had just opened it and unleashed a roar that could almost kill me. I watched as its mouth closed, and finally those small creatures started to detach from it. I quickly tried standing up. I had to get to my home before those creatures could. I slowly stood and started to carefully make my way over the hill. As I crested it, I could only stand in shock and horror as I looked at the remains of what was once my home, where once was a small community of huts, people, animals, and even a small wall. There was now nothing. There was a massive hole in the ground. The ground was blackened as if it was set aflame. Whatever that behemoth was, its roar could destroy entire communities. I felt the overwhelming grief and sorrow hit me all at once as I stared into the destruction of my home. I needed to grieve, but I first needed to warn the other communities. I rushed back towards the tribe I had just left. The pain burned deep as I moved. I kept feeling like I was being watched, as if a hungry predator was stalking me, waiting for a chance to strike and gain a quick meal. I glanced up at the behemoth in the sky. It wasn't that. Please don't be that, I kept thinking to myself. As I moved, the feeling of being watched got worse and worse. Every step felt like I was stepping into the mouth of one of those behemoths, and it scared me. I kept moving though. The other tribes needed to be warned. As I made my way back to where the other tribe's community was, it was not as I left it. Where once there were huts and a wall to keep predators out, there were now many of those smaller creatures that came from the behemoth. These smaller creatures seemed to be following orders, almost like a hound listening to its master giving them directions. I could only dread the thought that the behemoth was these hounds' master. The hounds reflected the light off of their skin. They were not as small as they appeared to be when coming from the behemoth. They were the size of the chief's hut. They were large. I saw the hounds had their mouths open, just like the behemoth. I watched as coming from the hounds even smaller creatures came out. How many creatures are there? I asked myself. These new creatures were different. There was much variation in size. Some were tall, some were short, some looked wider than others. They all walked upright, just like me though. I noticed there were some similarities between them. First, they were extremely pale. They must not have ever seen the light before. Second was their large round heads that seemed to contain only one eye that took up their entire face. The eye was shiny, almost like the other creatures. It seemed to almost show their surroundings if you looked directly at it. Finally, each creature seemed to have a bulge coming from their back. It was flat, almost like a carved stone, but it took up a majority of their backs. They looked like spirits, vengeful from beyond, wanting to reclaim the land for their own. I hid, trying to keep out of sight of these many spirits. All I could do was watch in horror as these spirits captured the tribe. They hit the ones that tried to escape and dragged them off to the hounds from which they came. I could hear the screams and wails of the tribe as they were dragged into the mouths of the giant hounds. I watched for what felt like an eternity, listening to the screams of fear slowly turn into wails of agony. Even though I was not close to the spirits or the hounds, I could hear the sound of ripping, cutting, carving. It sounded exactly like when the tribe butchers the creature we hunted for dinner that night. I tried thinking of a way that I could help the tribe, but I could not think of how I could combat so many terrifying beasts. I realized in horror that I would have to leave them. I would have to abandon this tribe and try to warn the next one. I went to turn to leave, but as I did, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. As I turned to look, everything went black, as I felt a sharp and terrible pain hit me in the face. Everything after that is difficult to remember. I remember seeing one of the spirits standing over me, speaking in some rough, horrible-sounding language. Next, I remember being slowly dragged to the community I had just been watching, the ground digging painfully in my back as I was dragged. Next, I saw the hound, its mouth open wide as the spirit dragged me inside. I saw the hound's mouth slowly close. I remember being tied down, the wails of agony surrounding me. I looked to the side to witness the tribe's chief hanging on a wall, his chest cut open, skin pulled back. I saw his insides were now on the outside. One of the spirits held a small object and walked around the chief, pointing the object towards the chief. I looked up, trying to put this horrifying sight behind me. Only now I was blinded by the brightest light I had ever seen. I closed my eyes, trying to block the light and the sound of screams from my mind. Suddenly, the light was blocked. I opened my eyes only to see the terrifying visage of one of the spirits looking down at me. I saw my reflection in its one giant eye. I saw the terror, pain, and despair reflected in that eye. I watched as it raised a small object, just like the one the other spirit had pointed at the chief. After the spirit played with it for a moment, it raised its other hand. This hand was holding a small but extremely sharp knife. I watched in despair as the knife descended towards me. From there, I only remember agony, pure and utter agony. They sliced my chest, and just like the chief, pulled my insides. Outside, every cut left me in the worst pain I have ever felt. But every time I could also hear the spirit speak in the horrifying language. Once they pulled the last of my insides out, the spirit did many things with them. It put them on weird devices, spoke even more in that horrible language, and even tossed them into the air before slowly putting them back inside of me. This process was even more painful than them being removed, as the creature basically threw them back inside me without any care. After the creature finished, it raised the knife again, this time cutting my neck. This time, the spirit was quick. After it peeled my skin away from my neck, it pointed the small object towards it, before putting down the knife and grabbing a tiny object that was near it. The object was small, almost invisible, except for the glint in the light when the spirit moved its hand. The spirit moved this object and shoved it into my neck. I felt as this spirit's hand moved around in my neck, pulling my very life around, as it seemed to reposition the inside of my neck to its liking. After an eternity, it pulled its hand back before slowly putting my skin back in place and moving on. Next, it checked my face. It opened my mouth, and with a yank ripped a tooth from my mouth. With all of this happening, I kept trying to scream, but it was as if I was paralyzed and couldn't move or scream. I felt everything. I felt as it pulled one of my eyes from its socket. There was a strand connected to the back of my eye, but I realized in horror that I could still see in the eye. I watched in excruciating pain as the spirit turned my eye around, and I realized I could see myself. I mentally screamed as the spirit pulled the strand from the back of my eye, and I realized I had lost sight in that eye. Next, it drove a spike into one of my ears. The spike was as long as my hand, and as sharp as the spirit's knife. As soon as it was placed, everything started to spin. I cried tears of pain, despair, and most of all, unbearable suffering. As I wept, I noticed something strange. The harsh language spoken by these spirits. I could slowly understand it. I listened, and realized I could only understand it when a spirit spoke on the side. The spike was in my ear. The other side still sounded harsh and unforgiving. "Sir, the language translation device has been implanted and should be functional," the spirit said. Another spirit on my other side responded, but I could not understand it. Suddenly, the device I was strapped to rose and lifted me into a standing position. Just like the chief, I was now tied to the wall, chest cut open, and watching in horror as my insides seemed to move and try to fall outside once again. There seemed to be some type of cloth that ensured that didn't happen. But it was terrifying as well as agonizing to see and feel my insides move and struggle to come out. There was a spirit standing in front of me, its one giant eye staring at me, taunting me. I saw there was another cloth wrapped around my neck, keeping me from reaching the release of death. This spirit and I stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Slowly I watched as the spirit reached up and pushed a small object on the side of its head. I watched in horror as the yellow eye slowly disappeared, replaced with a clear visage. Inside I saw a creature. It had a face similar to ours. It had eyes, a mouth, a nose, and hair. The only difference was this creature had pale skin. Not as pale as the skin on the outside, but still pale enough to show a lack of time in the light. This sight only strengthened my belief that these were vengeful spirits, beings from the past here to reclaim what was once theirs. This spirit and I stared at each other for a while longer, before finally I heard it say,
"Hello, unidentified alien species."
"My name is Major Robert Gardner of the United Nations Space Defense Force, and I have a few questions for you." History 160-Aztec History, Room 315, 3rd floor of the Harrison Building, 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. When I first signed up for this class, I was excited beyond belief. In my small community college, you were required to take a history course. I have always been a big history buff, and when I saw this class on the course catalog, I knew I was going to take it. The first day of class only made me more excited, as well as my professor. That day was rainy. Dark clouds loomed over the campus, threatening to spill over any moment. I was thankful I only had morning classes, and prayed the rain would subside before 6:30. The forecast called for heavy thunderstorms that afternoon. Walking from my dorm to the Harrison Building, I climbed up 3 flights of stairs to the top floor. Room 315 was at the end of the hallway, but as I exited the stairwell, I could smell the candles. A strong, smoky scent traveled down the hallway, and for a brief moment, I thought something had caught fire. It wouldn't have shocked me. The Harrison Building was old and falling apart. When I stepped into the classroom, the scent hit me in the face. A few other students sat in the classroom, and a tall, lanky man was at a desk in the front of the room. "Welcome. Your name is?" he questioned. His voice was deep and hoarse, the voice of a long-time smoker. "Jeremy Mitchell," I answered. I watched as he scanned a sheet, then made a check mark next to what I assumed was my name. "Nice to meet you, Jeremy. Please sit anywhere." He shot me a friendly smile. A small shiver ran down my spine. Something screamed at me that it was wrong, but I was too excited for the class to think about it. I sat on the 3rd row, closer to the wall, and got my laptop out. Looking around the room, there were only 10 other people in the room. Small class, I thought to myself, waiting for my laptop to boot up. A few minutes later, the professor got up and shut the door, trapping the 10 students inside. "Welcome to History 160. I'm Professor Manny," he began, pulling up a slideshow on the screen. "Today we're going to go over the syllabus and all that." It was difficult to tell if he was happy to be here. I noticed a few interesting things about the syllabus. A requirement of buying candles and Aztec death whistle. An extra credit opportunity if you donated blood to the Red Cross. And the final exam was a camping trip. What the fuck? Alright. So as I'm sure you all are reading, this class is structured differently from your other classes. For starters, the candles and Aztec death whistle are a requirement, he explained. At the end of the semester, we take a camping trip. I'll explain more as we get to that point in the semester. But it's all funded by the university, so you won't need to buy anything. I breathed a sigh of relief. As strange as it was, at least I wouldn't have to buy a ton of camping gear. The donating blood was odd, and he never explained it. Now and then I would donate plasma for money, so it was similar. Donate blood for some extra credit. The next few weeks were normal. He taught as any normal professor, with a few small red flags that I didn't think much about. 2 students had dropped the class, so there were a total of 8 of us. I only spoke to 3 of them. Clara, Sydney, and Matt. Clara was an education major, and involved in our school's women's soccer. She felt weird. A very stereotypical sporty girl, if that makes sense. If she wasn't studying or practicing, then she was at the gym, or with her girlfriend. Sydney was in general studies. She didn't know what she wanted to major in just yet, but she was in a sorority, so she spent most of her time partying. She showed up to class hungover most days and would text me later, asking for the notes. Matt was a forensics major, and he was fucking weird. He had this fascination. No, obsession with death. From what I knew, he didn't get out much, other than work in class, which wasn't much. He worked at a morgue as an assistant, so he was constantly surrounded by dead people. Although these three were a little odd, we seemed to get along well enough. The only thing we had in common was that our professor had contacted us over spring break. I stayed on campus for spring break, working a few extra shifts at the local Starbucks. But on Thursday, I got a notification from my email. Dear Jeremy, I hope your spring break is going well. I just wanted to inform you that the Red Cross blood donation will be on campus this Friday. I would suggest you go in order to gain extra credit. I wish you the best. Professor Manny. I had never mentioned to him that I was staying on campus for spring break. Did he see me around or at work? I brushed it off as that, figuring I was thinking too much into it. But when I returned back to class, Sydney had asked me if I had gotten the email. Jeremy, did Mr. Manny send you an email over spring break? She asked, a tint of worry lacing her voice. Yeah. I shot her a questioning glance. About Red Cross? The blood donation extra credit? Her voice was shaky. Oddly enough, she wasn't hungover. Yeah? How'd you know? Because he sent me the same email. I don't know how, but he knew I was staying on campus for spring break. She sounded scared. Yeah. Same. I just figured he had seen me around or something though. Don't think about it too much. I tried to rationalize. Later, when Clara had arrived, we had the same discussion. She had also stayed on campus for spring break and gotten the same email. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to believe that Professor Manny had just seen us around campus, but something about it rubbed me the wrong way. I stopped trying to rationalize when I heard that Matt had not only gotten the same email, but had also disappeared. Clara had spoken to Matt over spring break, informing me and Sydney that he had also gotten the strange email, but then he went radio silent. He stopped showing up to class and stopped responding to texts. 2 days later, we finally heard that he just vanished. I tried not to think about it. I tried to rationalize that it was just a coincidence. Deep down, I knew it wasn't. But I guess I wanted to believe that it was. Ever since then, the class has become increasingly strange. We've started talking about Aztec mythology, and that's when everything started going downhill. Professor Manny had started this unit normally, giving an overview of gods, and mentioning a few stories that we would need to know. Then, we started talking about Mictlantecuhtli. For those that don't know, Mictlantecuhtli is like the Hades of Aztec mythology. He rules over the underworld and is the god of death. I didn't miss the way that when my professor first mentioned him, his eyes glossed over. I didn't miss how he seemed to ramble about this god for longer than the others. It was odd that the next time we had class, the entire lecture was about Mictlantecuhtli. The way Manny spoke about Mictlantecuhtli was the same way that Matt spoke about death, filled with infatuation and obsession. Ever since, the class has taken a dramatic shift. Any time Manny gets the opportunity to mention this god of death, he does. I'm trying to do some more research on this god, trying to learn just why my professor likes him so much. I'm also trying to stay updated on Matt, trying to figure out what happened. More and more red flags keep popping up in the class, but none of the other students seem to notice what's going on. Either they aren't bothered, or don't show it. It's kind of creepy, but I try not to think much about it. I have bigger things to worry about. The camping trip is right around the corner, and I can't help but feel nervous. It feels like a massive thunderstorm, threatening to create widespread havoc on the town it hits. I have a pit in my stomach. Something is so wrong. I've never believed in inner sixth sense bullshit, but what I do believe is that something is about to eat me alive. I remember our nights of brutal passion. It was so tragically beautiful. The way you danced in the street, splashing in acrylic puddles of orange glow in the rain. I begged you then to come inside, only to hear you say, "Why should I miss such a gorgeous night?" I admired your childlike sense of wonder. You seized your days with grace and hope. I never understood how someone could be so optimistic, given your life and how it transpired. It didn't make sense, but it convinced me to live happily with you. You were my burning star of hope. You pulled me out of my misery. It was you that grabbed my arm, and we danced in the rain. Together, it was cold and wet, but your body was warm, and your breath was hot on my neck. When you said you loved me for the first time, I'll never forget the way you feel. Your warmth. So, why did you do it? I loved you. I loved you so deeply that when you left, I started to carve pieces of myself to release the bright hot red pain boiling inside of me. What I did to you was a mistake, Anna. I promise it was. I no longer sleep. I haven't, since you've been in the backyard. Sometimes I lay on the grave I made for you, just to stay close to the warmth you give the earth. I cry at night. And I started to drink again. My vice you got me to quit. But since you're not here, I can't seem to stop myself anymore. I remember the night it happened, when I found that man's shirt tucked away under the bed. The wrapper too. I remember the terse language, then the cursing, then the shouting. How could you do that to me? Anna, how could you say you love me when you betrayed me, my angel given to me from the heavens above? How could you perform such a vile sin? You rushed me, pounding on my chest, and begged for forgiveness with every ounce of your being, but I could not forget, so I could not forgive. You hated that. You claimed that I did not love you, that love was unconditional, forever, pure. My dear Anna, I can still love you and despise what you've done. The thin line we walk of love and hate was unbalanced. And so I grabbed that knife and proved that our love was in fact unconditional. It was forever and pure. You seemed to acknowledge my act of passion and saw it for what it was. When the knife dug into your chest, blood pooled on your shirt, and all you did was look up at me and smiled. You knew just as much as I did that we could never be truly apart, and in that moment, I forgave your sin, our love baptized in your blood. So why haven't you left? I still hear you at night, wandering the house, the familiar noise of your feet shuffling through the halls. At first, I thought the pain of you being gone was making me mad, but then you began to sing. As clear as day, you sang your bright and joyous song in the dark halls of our home. It startled me awake, and I ran through every room to find you. I ran outside to see if you managed to come out from beneath the peach tree, but you were still there, still nurturing our tree with whatever is left of your body. I eat your fruit every day, and imagine still tasting your sweet lips on mine. I started to catch glimpses of you in our mirrors and windows. Just getting to see you for a fraction of a second brought tears to my eyes. It was so fast, but unmistakably you. You were watching over me from the heavens above, and I knew that it was because of our love that you could be here with me even after death. God himself granted us to be together. Unconditional love. But Anna, seeing you has begun to bring me so much sadness. Last night, when laying in bed, I turned over and smelled your perfume, your beautiful rose and cardamom. I reached out and felt the curves of your body. It made me sob to sleep. I can't help but think of our last night together. Slowly, every time you appear to me, I don't think of you dancing, but of you on your knees, looking up at me with a smile and a knife sticking out of your chest. I asked you to stop. I could no longer prove our love, and I can no longer say I love you. I have to move on, and if you loved me, you would let me go, but you didn't. Maybe I deserve this. I deserve to be haunted by you. It was my wish and everything that I asked for you to be forever mine, but I have to take it back. I deserve this, and maybe that's why you won't leave. You began to hurt me last week. It started with you moving our things across the house, throwing silverware out of drawers, breaking plates on the kitchen floor. Then, you started to bring knives to my room. You laid every knife we owned out on the carpet in beautiful spirals and patterns. My Anna, you are still so talented, but you started to cut me. You threw your art at me with precision, and it nearly cut my throat. When that didn't procure what you wanted, You started to scratch me at night. Your nails burned through my flesh, and I screamed out in pain, swinging my fists through the blanket, in frustration that I could not reach you. My dear Anna, it cannot say that you love me anymore either. I could understand if you wanted me to be with you in the afterlife, and so you allowed me to drink a poison, or if you actually struck me with that blade, and so we could be together. But no, recently, I have come to understand that all you want is to make me suffer. Anna, please, please stop. I can't take this anymore. I haven't slept in days. You are up every night, and ensure I am there to be up with you. But Anna, you must move on. If you truly did love me, then you would let me go. I can't handle the pain anymore. My body is filled with the scars and burned kisses of your onslaught. I am scared of you, Anna. I begged you today to talk to me. I paraded around our house and pleaded for you to come out. I begged for your forgiveness. If I could take it back, I would. I screamed into the void. If I could die instead of you, I would. But you never answered me. But tonight, as I was writing my letter to you, you grabbed my shoulder and finally spoke to me. In your sweet and velvety tone, you don't get to let go. Oh, Anna, our love truly is beyond all reason. I'll continue to live for you, and I will bear the wounds you give me as proof of our love, our eternity together. Hello, I answered the phone. I saw this number on an ad online. You're correct. What do you need? I asked, holding back laughter. I was still in disbelief that the ads had worked. I'm not sure. Things keep moving in my house. They're never where I left them when I leave. Her voice was shaking, assumingly with fear. She gave us her address, agreed on a price of $120, and we told her to stay away from the house for the day. We set off for the house with nothing but some salt, an old crucifix, and some walkie-talkies that didn't reach very far. The house wasn't too far away. About a 20-minute drive. When we arrived, she was already gone. Though she said she'd leave a key under the doormat, we messed around inside the house for a while, recorded some footage for the website, and left. It was that simple. We did this about 3 more times that day. All callers from a neighboring town. We figured that since we had more callers from there, we'd do those today and schedule the Hillkit callers for tomorrow. By the end of the day, we had $400. It was too easy. The next day we met up at the Holly Tree. That was sort of our base of operations. Sam took the first call. It was for 66 Holly Hedge Drive, the abandoned house on Sam's Road. That's weird, wrote Aidan. Yeah, I agreed. Nobody's lived there for years. Sam thought it must be a prank call, so we didn't waste our time with it and went to help someone else. It didn't take long for us to get another call, asking for the same address. Hello? Hi. This is Hillkit Paranormal Society. What do you need? Silence. Hello? I asked, unsure if I had been hung up on. 66 Holly Hedge Drive. It wasn't the same person as before. I panicked and hung up. That was weird, I said. Concerned. Sam responded. A lot of people prank calling, I guess. Must be a friend of the first kid. Hopefully. I said. Nobody wanted to admit it, for fear of being made fun of, but I could tell everyone had the same thought. Something was wrong with that house. We moved on to the next house. An old woman called about her dead cat's meows still being heard in her house. I felt bad about some of our clients because it was mostly paranoid, hyper-religious people dealing with mental illness. But the ethics of it didn't matter. Not with May's life on the line. When we arrived, the old lady was still there and refused to leave until we had exorcised her dead cat. She handed us the keys and we let ourselves in. Everything seemed normal at first. We pretended to search the house for where the sound was coming from, but couldn't hear anything. I called for a debrief in Sam's car. We need to fake hearing it, I proposed. Imagine how much extra she'd pay us if we actually did something. Aidan nodded and smiled. We devised a plan to meet up in her kitchen, and pretend to hear the cat's meows. Lay the salt down, say a few prayers, and make it look as real as possible. We headed in, straight toward the kitchen. We walked around a little, inspecting things, making ourselves look busy. Me and Sam kept glancing at each other, waiting nervously for one to make the first move. At that moment I realized how jealous I was of Aiden. Lying must be easy without having to talk. "Did you hear that?" he asked suddenly. "It's here." Aiden nodded. Him and Sam walked over to the counter. We laid the salt out, and tried not to laugh as I said some prayers I learned at church camp when I was younger. The old lady came inside the house to check on us and saw what we were doing. She smiled and wished us luck. But as she turned to leave the house, she stopped. We all stopped. We all stopped. We all heard it. A low, distorted meow coming from the basement door to my right. All of a sudden, the old woman didn't seem so crazy anymore. She hurried out of the house and told us to go down to the basement to investigate. Otherwise, we wouldn't get paid. I looked at Aiden nervously. We exchanged looks that gave the impression that neither of us wanted to be here. As we stepped toward the exit, we heard a door open from behind us. I spun around. It was Sam. He was headed down the basement stairs. "What are you doing?" I asked, annoyed. "Touring my fucking sister." He ran down the stairs, stomping. I felt bad for whatever creature was down there. The sound grew louder, as there was a loud snap. The power went out, but the sound kept going, piercing through the dark emptiness of the house. Me and Aiden hurried after Sam. Halfway down the stairs, we heard him muttering something under his breath. The meowing had stopped, and in its place, white noise began. TV static, loud and oppressive. As I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned to look at Sam, he was crying, on his knees with his pocket knife drawn in his hand, in front of him. The TV. Impossible, I thought, as the power was still off. Then I read what was on the TV. 66. We ended up getting our money, and only a few days later the old woman had moved away. We had gained quite a reputation around our area. More and more calls came in by the day. We were only a few cases off paying for her surgery. With the rise of clients came the rise of the 66 calls. We were all concerned. And though nobody said anything, I could tell it was only a matter of time before we got too curious and visited the house. The thought made me sick to my stomach with a sort of excitement. It was a confusing feeling. I knew I shouldn't go, but I yearned for it. Deep down it was what I wanted, but I couldn't tell why. Laying in bed that night, my phone lit up on my nightstand, the low hum breaking the dead silence of my room. I was glad to take my mind off of what happened that day. The thoughts still circling my mind, keeping me up. It was May. This was the first contact she made since her diagnosis. The text simply said, "Come outside." I did as I was told, got dressed and snuck outside. I found her leaned up against the fence outside my house. She looked frail, weak, almost cold. We walked and talked for hours, just like we used to, doing anything to take our minds off both our situations. Eventually we made it to the tree, and May broke what she thought to be news to me. "My parents can't pay for my surgery," she said, clearly holding back tears. I told her I knew Sam had overheard them talking about it. I said that we were making money to pay for it, and she was over the moon. I decided not to tell her how. It's either we're ghost hunting, or we're scamming religious people out of hundreds of dollars, and I'm not sure she'd take too kindly to either of them. I walked her home, and before we got inside, she started to cough. I noticed the hand she coughed into was covered in blood. She looked up at me weakly, her soft green eyes tearing up. "I'm dying, Cal," she said, her voice trembling as she began to cry. I knew it was true. I didn't want to believe it. The calls seemed to be getting worse. More and more 66 calls came in, until there were more of them than the real clients. They just kept coming. We had 2 calls scheduled for tomorrow. They were supposed to be the last. We made it to the first house and couldn't find anything. The man refused to pay us until he had seen something. Clearly he saw the videos online. and just wanted to see something cool. We left without the money. The next case was even worse. On the way there, I felt a sense of unexplainable dread. I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. The TV Amy. The blood on her hand. We needed to help her. We arrived at the house, although something felt off. The grass was overgrown. The walls had weeds sprouting from the cracks in the concrete. The car in the driveway had flat tires and grimy windows. It looked almost abandoned. I reached for the rusted brass handle of the front door. It was unlocked. I stepped forward into the house, and my shoe was soaked. I recoiled and stepped back in disgust. The entire floor was covered in a dark, muddy liquid. The walls were stripped open, revealing burst pipes and sparking wires, which seemed to be twisted to the number 6. A horrible chill shot through my spine. I tossed it up to me being tired. I hadn't slept much the night before, and my mind was just playing tricks on me, not wanting to deal with this situation. We figured it was just a prank call to another abandoned house. But that was it, the last of the cases we had scheduled. We figured we'd have made enough money by the time these clients were dealt with, so we shut down the website. Sam proposed something like this might happen, but I was too focused on the thought of May being cured and wanting it to happen as soon as possible, so we could finally be done with the 66 bullshit that I shut it down anyway. When we made it back to the tree, I was stressed out. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see what was in that house. It was as if I was being called to it. As I was about to tell Aiden and Sam about my desire to explore the abandoned house, my phone rang. I hoped it was May, but the number wasn't saved to my phone. I knew it wasn't another client, as the site had been down for hours at this point. I answered it, to static, just like the TV in the house. As I was about to hang up, a voice spoke. It sounded strained, almost like it was painful to talk, like a parched throat, cutting with each word. 66. I threw the phone. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands clasped the side of my head. The feeling returned. The feeling I was being called, drawn to it. The house. I had to go. I wasn't even thinking about May. I just needed to see what was in that house. Cal, what was it? Is May all right? Sam asked me. I felt Aiden's hand rest on my shoulder. I pushed it off out of frustration. I couldn't think. We need to go. Sam asked, where? What's going on? The house. 66. We need to go. I can't fucking take it anymore. Sam didn't think it was a good idea, but I didn't care. I felt like I was about to burst. Sam was trying to lecture me on how we need to at least take care of May before going, and that he had a bad feeling about going. Then Aiden began to write. We said only a few $100s off. They should let us pay the rest in installments, right? I agreed and urged them to go with me. Sam was reluctant. He said we should go to the hospital and talk to the doctors first. But we teased him for being too scared to go to the house. And God forbid Sam feel a human emotion like fear. He reluctantly agreed to come. We began to walk. I felt nervous, or maybe excited. It was hard to tell. There was a pressure in my chest, butterflies in my stomach, that only worsened as we got closer. I don't know why I felt this way. I know I shouldn't have. I felt like I was drawn to it, like a guilty pleasure or a bad habit. We walked for about a half an hour, eventually passing Sam's house. I looked through May's window, foolishly hoping she'd look back. We hadn't spoken since the other night, when she told me she was dying. Soon enough she'd have to be fully hospitalized, as her condition kept getting worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was my fault, like I was guilty. We were getting closer. I could almost see it now, the mossy, filthy roof, the broken windows, the graffiti on the wall. I couldn't contain my excitement, my nerves. One part of me wanted to turn back and never set foot near the house again. The other part needed to know what was in there. We arrived and stood in front of the two broken down, beat-up cars. Shattered glass littered the driveway. Aiden reached for the door, but I already knew it'd be locked. I made my way around the side as I heard him fiddling with the door handle and gestured to them to follow me. The side door was unlocked, just as it had been when I went there with May all those years ago. We walked down the side of the house. The walls were littered with cracks, sprouting with moss and weeds. The backyard wasn't much better than the front, with overgrown grass and rusted lawn chairs. The glass sliding door to the back was smashed open, so we went inside. I'm a 19-year-old male, and my name is Lewis, and I weigh 300 pounds. I've been trying to lose weight for some time. Over the years I've lost 16 pounds in 3 months, and it is due to me either forgetting to eat something or not having anything to eat, which I do know is probably not the healthiest. But I have taken a big step in my health. I've been eating a balanced meal and at least going on a walk every night. If I don't do a lot of exercise, I do my best when I can. That night, I decided to go a little later. I usually go between 6 and 7, but this time, I started at 9:30. I got my walking shoes and grabbed my phone and my earbuds. Also, let me tell you, these aren't like any kind of earbuds. They're the ones that don't go in your ear, but sit on the side of your ear, so you can still listen to your surroundings. This is important to the story. I put on my earbuds and connected them to my phone, so I could listen to some tunes, and I grabbed my knife and keys. I got over to the door, went outside, and started my walk. My neighborhood is a pretty decent size for a neighborhood. It's definitely a nice place to take a long walk, and it's like an hour and 30-minute walk around back. At first, my walk was going as usual. Cold air, stars in the sky. It was a nice little night walk, but after 30 minutes passed, I heard something over my music, and for some reason, my body got this high urge to run, but I controlled that urge not to. The sound was grass on the side of me making noise as if someone was walking on the grass beside me, so I turned to look, and no one was there. So I continued as if it wasn't anything, but I did decide to turn my music down a bit, because that made me uneasy, and I'm a pretty precarious guy. If I feel something off, I usually listen to that feeling. 2 more minutes go by and nothing, and I hear what sounds like someone or something is matching my walking pattern as to not make me think someone is following me, and I just keep walking, not wanting to look back, because that was advice I took to heart when hearing it. A while back, I made it to a street sign straight as the way back to my house, but it was the quicker way back, and then there was the right way, which was the longer way back, and as I was approaching, I decided to go the longer way, because I wanted to lose this weight. I was despite to. So I went down the right way, and out of nowhere, I heard someone behind me say, "Unknown, hey you, could you look at me?" I was scared as shit, but I didn't stop walking. I picked up the past from a casual walk to a more of an eye. Got to go to the bathroom fast walk. I didn't want to stop walking because I wanted to give the guy behind me the impression I couldn't hear him. "Unknown, I saw you walking a bit ago, and wanted to see why. Oh, and I'm Mr. Bob." I ignored him. I look at my watch, 10:10, fuck. I thought to myself, I still have some time to go, but luckily I knew the street I went down had motion lights, so as I was walking up the motion lights turned on, and I saw my shadow and, what F did he leave? I only saw my shadow. "Mr. Bob, do you know I'm here?" Okay. I'm fucking scared to shit. Why couldn't I see his fucking shadow? Where the fuck is Mr. Bob? If his shadow isn't there. Mr. Bob. I hate these motion sensor lights. It ruins this for me. I still didn't respond. I just kept walking, and I could turn back, because it would do something if it knew I knew it was there or somewhere. "Mr. Bob. Hey man, I think you should turn around and look at me. It would be cool of you. I'm not a religious person, but I hope to God that I live through this." A few minutes go by, and I know that I'm halfway to my house. "Mr. Bob, I've been watching you for a few months now, and I know this isn't how you usually walk. I think you know I'm here." Oh fuck, he knows. But still, I'm not going to signify that I've known, so I keep walking. I see another street sign. One way will take me back to my house, but was dark, and the other way I knew one of my neighbors had a big long privacy fence with sensor lights, and went that way. Mr. Bob, this is a new path either. I've just been talking to someone with headphones on, and I just look like a crazy person. Or you're doing something. In my head, this whole time I kept saying, "Fuck you, Mr. Bob, you fuckface," which made me laugh and made me not be too stressed about the situation. Mr. Bob, what's so funny? Maybe you don't know I'm here. Yes. Think that, you dumb fuck. I saw the long privacy fence and was so happy to see the privacy fence. As I got to the first sensor, all I could hear was Mr. Bob saying something that drained the blood from my body. Mr. Bob, if you don't look at me, I will half fucking light past the first light. Mr. Bob, motherfucker, you do know I'm a past the second. I decided at that moment at the third I'd run. Mr. Bob. I dashed as that thing Mr. Bob was discombobulated. I ran so fast, I almost tripped a bunch of times. I got to my street and hear something that almost pissed my pants. Mr. Bob, you little fuck, I knew you knew. Right there, for some reason I stopped and bent over. I heard Mr. Bob angrily stopping beside me. Mr. Bob, why did you stop running? I saw my shoe untied, so I tied it. Mr. Bob. Oh, you were just running for exercise. My house was down the street, but I remember my grandparents' house, that is on the same street, has a sensor light. So I walked there instead. Thankfully I had my keys. So once the sensor light kicked on, I could get inside. Mr. Bob. Well, I'm getting bored with you. I might just kill you here.
I freaked when I heard that, so once I got done tying my shoe, I started in the past I had before I saw the RV that was in my grandparents' house. I grabbed my keys from my pocket but didn't pull them out just yet.
Mr. Bob. I don't know how I'm gonna do it. Ha 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 ha. The sensor light. Yes, I calmly got to the door to not make it suspicious. I unlocked the door and closed the door, locking it behind, looked at my watch. 11:45. Looker at my phone, and texted my dad. I was spending the night at my parents' house. I sat on the couch and cried for a second, because that was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I honestly thought I was going to die, but I felt like I had to write this somewhere to let people know. If you hear someone walking behind you, or if someone asks you to look at them, take the safest way home, and remember, sensor lights are your friend, or if you can, just don't walk alone at night. My hair was beyond unruly. I was damn near sporting a mullet, so I decided a haircut was long overdue, especially since it was mid-July. I was sweating my ass off with my hair being this long. When my day off at the shop rolled around, I decided it was a good time to look for a cheap cut. I drove past several high-end haircut places, but due to insufficient funds, I didn't really feel like paying the price. In the long run, I wish I had. Since I didn't have anything else to do, I drove around for quite some time. I stopped for lunch at a gas station. Yeah, I'm that cheap. Eventually I stumbled across a sign. Haircut. 1.50. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a terrible idea, and I agree. However, I've never been one to care about personal appearance and upkeep, so the prospect of a haircut this cheap greatly appealed to me. I wasn't scared of someone giving me a really horrible hairstyle, as evident by my awful long greasy hair I currently sported. The only detail that mattered was the frugality of it. I wish I had known just how bad it would be. Then maybe I would have paid the extra bucks for a decent hairstyle. You got what you pay for after all. I pulled into the parking lot that was littered with potholes, just like everywhere in the city, my car bouncing around. I shut off the engine and strolled inside. There was a white front desk with a woman standing behind it. Silky blonde hair sprouted out of her porcelain skin. I'd estimate she was in her mid-40s. She stared at me, her green eyes bloodshot. I already felt kind of sketchy. Hey, I saw the sign outside for a $1.50 haircut. I said, I'd love to cut your hair. she said, breathing heavily. Her eyes were unblinking. Something about the way she said that threw me off. I gulped and nervously backtracked. Actually, that's okay. I just realized that's too late for... My words trailed off as she leaped over the counter with brute force. Before I could react, I was pinned to the floor. A rag soon covered my face. When I came to, I felt a scalding hot pain on my scalp. My hair was being washed, but the water was nearly boiling. I tried to scream in agony, but my face was covered. I tried to wrestle myself free, but I was tied to the chair. Tears filled my eyes as the water burned my scalp. At long last, she had finished and grabbed a towel, yanking my head about violently drying it. She then pushed a button, and I heard some mechanical whirring as my seat began to unrecline. I stared helplessly in the mirror at my bound body, terrified of what was to come next. I kept waiting for a giant set of clippers or something to be revealed, but nothing. It was far worse. It happened so quickly, I could hardly react. Not that I would have been able to stop it anyways, but before I knew it, I could feel her warm, putrid breath on my neck. I looked up into the mirror, and she leaned down and took a huge bite out of my hair, ripping it from my scalp. This continued. I was in agony as she tore the hair from my head with her teeth. And the worst part, she was eating it. I saw her munching down like it was a 5-star meal. I wanted to vomit, though I feared she may eat that too. She chomped and yanked until there was no hair on my bleeding scalp. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was lying on the concrete, right in front of that store. I clumsily got it and sprinted to my car without turning back, disobeying all traffic laws. I headed for the police station. I haphazardly parked my car and dashed inside, flinging the door open, panting. I got a couple of stares from the officers inside. I looked horrible with my bleeding scalp. Yusuf gotta help me. I tried to get my hair cut. The sign said haircut for $1.50. Sorry, that's out of our jurisdiction. We can't help you, an officer chimed. What? Out of your jurisdiction? It sits not even that far. It sits within the city limits. Sir, you need to calm down. Are you serious? I was just attacked, and you're telling me there's nothing you can do about it. Afraid not. We're gonna have to ask you to leave, he said with a glare. I hightailed out of there. Clearly, something was going on here. Were those cops somehow on that lady's payroll? It didn't make any sense. What the hell was going on? I drove home in silence. Normally I blast music at unreasonable volumes out of my nearly blown-out speakers, but I was in no mood. When I arrived home, I made a decision. Fine. If the cops wouldn't help me, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. I rummaged through the drawer in my nightstand and fished out my pistol. To be perfectly honest, I didn't really have a plan. I just knew I had to do something. My head still ached in pain. I got in my car and raced back to that awful place. The sign parading the cheap haircut waved in the breeze, as if taunting me when I whipped into the parking lot. I grabbed the pistol out of the passenger seat and put it into my jacket pocket, then stepped out of the car. The sun had set now. The lights were still on in this place. The fluorescence hummed as I carefully stepped inside. This time she wasn't behind the counter. No one was. I crept around like a soldier, waving my gun around, carefully walking past the empty chairs. I spotted a curtain. No light came from inside. I made my way over there. The gun in my hand shook as my body recoiled in fear. I held my breath and yanked back the curtain. In the shadows, I was greeted by something unexpected. A figure stood there, completely covered in long hair, brown just like mine. It was as if it was wearing a suit made of hair. In the blink of an eye, it charged towards me. Without hesitation, I fired my pistol. 4 shots. It crumpled to the floor below me, pink goo oozing out of the gunshot wounds. I decided I'd better get out of there. And fast. If those cops were really in on whatever this was, they surely would be after me soon. More pink goo oozed from the creature. Normally I like the color pink, but this was a really gross color, almost flesh-like. I could see some movement as I turned around. Once again, sprinting to my car, as I got to the door, I heard a thump. I didn't turn around, just kept going. By the time I got home, I was incredibly paranoid. I kept expecting that thing or the cops to find me. I don't know which was worse. I decided to lay low for a week while I plotted my next move. That plan was abruptly cut short. 5 days later, as I pondered what to do, I peered out the window. Staring at me from across the street was me? Someone or something that resembled me down to the last detail stood on the sidewalk across the road and just stared at me. Oh God, was I going to be replaced? No way. I couldn't allow that to happen. I popped open my closet and grabbed more ammo. Sprinting out of the front door with my pistol in hand, I ran towards my lookalike. Only he was already gone. Yet again, I hopped into my worn-out car and sped towards that cursed store. As soon as I started my engine, red and blue lights flashed at the end of my cove. I floored it, not looking back. The cops followed closely behind. I was not gonna let them replace me. As I whipped corners driving one-handed trying to duck the cops, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. Sitting in the back of one of the cop cars was my clone, just staring in front of him. What was their plan? Why were they trying to replace me? I pondered this as the cops gained on me, one on each side of me. They continuously rammed into the side of my vehicle, trying to run me off the road. I didn't let up, however. But they noticed. I saw 2 of them pull out pistols. I ducked and slammed on my brakes. Several shots went off ahead of me. The cop cars swerved out of control. I whipped the steering wheel around and turned the corner down a side street so fast, I nearly tipped my car over. I continued this pace all the way to the hair salon, if you can even call it that. I slammed my door and hurried towards the door. This time the lights were off. I yanked the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. A few seconds later, the lights kicked on. I heard the lock in the door click. It swung open as I pulled on it with all my might. That couldn't be good. Rounding the corner towards the desk was that woman once again. "I'd love to cut your hair. Is that the only thing you know how to say?" "You'll pay for this," I said, waving my pistol towards her. She didn't budge. Bang! I fired off a shot. It hit her square in the forehead, blood seeping from the wound. She crumpled to the floor in an instant. Pink goo spurted up from underneath the desk like a geyser. Before I could react, however, I heard movement behind me. I felt a throbbing pain on the back of my head as I turned around. I was met with 2 cops wearing bloodied clothes and scowls on their faces. The one held a police baton in his hand. Without time to think, he hit me again. The 2 men grabbed me and yanked me into the car. Cuffing my hands together, where was my clone? I wondered. They didn't bother blindfolding me, which I assumed was a bad sign. After just 5 minutes of driving, we arrived at an old warehouse. Of course, the battered cops jolted me out of the car angrily and pushed me inside the metal door, slamming it shut behind us. Inside, I spotted several cages, mostly empty, except for one. It had a woman inside. Her scalp was like mine, torn and bloodied. Though the blood had dried, little strands of hair attempted to grow on this barren scalp. She looked up at me. I met her gaze. I recognized that face, though dirtied with blood, dirt and sweat. The barber shop. It was the same lady. Oh God. They stuffed me into that cage faster than I could comprehend, though I tried to protest. Once that steel door slammed, I turned towards the lady in the cage. "Why are we here?" "So they can feed," she said. "How long have you been here?" "What's your name?" "I don't know. I lost count, but several weeks by this point, and my name's Jessica. Frank." I say, Jesus. I killed one, I think. Those things. It looked just like you. I shot it in the head, and it turned into some kind of slime or something. Somewhere out there is one that looks just like me. You didn't kill it. What? That's what I thought too. I thought I had killed one, but it put itself back together. I stared. There's got to be some way. So you're telling me that one I killed is still out there? Yes. We just got to find a way to kill them then. Maybe if we completely destroy that pink stuff before it gets put back together. Or maybe they're vulnerable while feeding. That sounds great. And all but how are we going to do that from inside these cages? We're trapped in here. I'm working on it. She sulked. I don't think she was too convinced of my escape plan or lack thereof. Truthfully, I didn't know how we were going to get out of here. How did they get you anyways? I said. My best friend. So shouldn't she be in here now?
Where is she?
I mean, the real her. Yeah. She was here. But they moved her. I don't know why. But she used to be in the cage you're in now. My mind began to think of the worst possible scenarios. Surely if they removed her, it meant they didn't need her anymore. They probably disposed of her. I tried to keep my composure. I didn't want this lady to give up hope. I'm sure she still held on to the idea that her friend was still alive somewhere. We'll find her, don't worry, I said. Though I did worry. It's fine. You don't have to pretend. She's probably long gone by now. I didn't know what to say. So I changed the subject. None of this makes any sense. I just don't understand these things. Why do they need to keep feeding on us? I've had a lot of time to think about this. I think at first, they need the hair to create, well, the clones, to reproduce, I guess. Then after that, it seems that they need the hair to live, because I've only seen one clone for each person. They haven't made more clones of me, and I've been here a while. So maybe if we deprive them of our hair, then they'll die. No. I doubt it. Can't they just find someone else to feed on? And that's what I think happened to my friend. She must not have been useful for them anymore. Good point. I pondered what to do. It really seemed that we were all out of options. But what about those cops? I don't understand their role in this. They bleed like real people. So why are they helping these hair-eating freaks? That I don't know. I believe it goes deeper than we think, and if that's the case, we are truly fucked. Do they feed us in here? Yeah, once a day. A bowl of scrambled eggs and a glass of carrot juice. What the fuck? I assume it has something to do with hair growth. She shrugged. So what's your plan, genius? Hey, watch the attitude. She didn't respond. Sorry. I'm sure you're beyond irritated being stuck in here. I wish I knew what to do. She nodded. Wait, I've seen it in movies. We can escape our handcuffs by breaking our fingers. She didn't look amused. And how will we break our fingers? Okay. Maybe not. I scanned the room, looking for something, anything to help us escape. The room was dimly lit, so it was difficult to see. All of a sudden, I heard the screeching of that metal door. Light poured into the warehouse. In that light, I caught a glimpse of something way in the back. There was another person in here, an old man. He was caged too. He looked to be in his 80s. His frail body clearly was on the decline. I reckoned he had little time left on this earth. I quickly shot my head back forward when I heard metal locks clicking. The woman next to me. Her cage was being opened by those cops. Wait. No. What are you doing? She screamed. I stared in horror as they dragged her away. She kicked and screamed. Wait! Take me instead. She's fine. She has lots of hair left. It was to no avail. The metal door slammed once again, enveloping me in darkness. I felt hopeless and afraid. What was I to do now? How would I help her? But then I remembered my newfound discovery in the midst of all this chaos. The warehouse wasn't as empty as I had thought. There was another trapped in here with me. The old one brought his grandchild to a seaside cave on a dreadful stormy winter night. This cave was special because a god had taken residence there, according to legend, the master of the oceans, in a corporeal form. A cruel and bestial thing, as dark and vicious as the depths themselves, fickle and turbulent as the seas at heart. an abyssal predator concealing his lust for destruction and chaos under an anthropomorphic facade crafted with his swarm of tentacled appendages. No one had seen the god himself, merely a statue placed there by the Old One all those years ago. None dared question the validity of the tales, for the seas were treacherous, and that was enough to prove his existence. Standing before the statue of this divinity, the Old One placed a clawed hand on his grandchild Sith's shoulders, asking the youth, "My lamb, are you ready to become the savior of our world?" The little child could only nod in acceptance. He knew his destiny was one of thankless greatness. He also knew the road to his purpose in life was full of unimaginable suffering. Year after year, he watched the Old One repeat the same ritual with his 6 siblings. Again and again he watched his brothers and sisters save the universe from the wrath of their terrible lord. Good fortune blessed their family with a duty, a truly wonderful duty to the world. By 13 years of age, the boy knew he wasn't long for this world. All his siblings who reached that age had to be offered as a willing sacrifice to their lord. An innocent life was to be given away to salvage the world. If so, let us save this world. "My beautiful lamb," proclaimed the Old One, with a wide grin on his face. Tightly gripping his cane, he swung it at the boy, hitting him hard across the face. The child fell onto the rocky surface below, spitting blood and crying out in pain. "Did you just moan?" The Old One berated. "Even your 2 sisters did not moan like that." His hand rising again into the air, a thunderclap echoed across the cave as the cane struck flesh again. Then, again and again, each blow harder than the one before. Each crack of the wooden cane almost loud enough to silence the agonized cries of torment rumbling across the cave. Who would have thought that you, the last of my seed, the one who was supposed to be perfect, would be the weakest one of all? The Old One sneered, beating into his grandchild repeatedly with sadistic hatred, guiding each blow in a remarkable precision meant to prolong the torture for as long as humanely possible. The boy, curled up into a fetal position, could barely hear himself think over the repeated waves of ache, washing all over his body. There was no point in protesting his innocence. There was no point in even uttering any syllables. He knew his body was no longer his own. It now belonged to the gods and their priest. His grandfather, even if he wanted to defend his assigned adulthood, he could no longer control his mouth or throat. Nothing was his in this world anymore. Nothing but an onslaught of indescribable pain. Finally satisfied with the ritualistic abuse he inflicted, the Old One, covered in sweat and blood, and frothing at the mouth like a rabid animal, collapsed onto his grandchild, turning the youthful husk, now colored black and blue with stains of red all over, onto its back. The Old One picked up a sharp stone from the ground and slammed it hard into the child's chest with ecstatic glee. He slammed the stone again and again, until the flesh and the bone caved in on themselves, leaving a gap wide enough to push his hand inside the child. "Ah, there it is. The source of all my joy," the animal cried out. Its hand slid into the boy's chest. The youth weakly coughed, barely hanging on to life. He could hardly tell apart his monstrous grandfather from the surrounding darkness and cold. Everything turned even dimmer once the bloodied hand came out of his chest again. The monster held out its hand in triumph, clutching the child's yet beating heart. Blood from the exposed organ dripped onto the youth's pale lips. As everything vanished into the void, even the bizarrely satisfied smirk on his grandfather's face. The filicide of his last remaining grandchild had yet to satisfy his hunger for violent pain. The demise of the one he had forced to behold as he snuffed the light from the eyes of their kin repeatedly did not satisfy his thirst for the obscene. Still hungering for more, the subhuman mortal shoved the little heart into his throat, swallowing it whole. The taste of human flesh further enticed his madness, forcing him to sink his yellow rotting teeth into the infantile carcass. Intoxicated with the ferrous properties of his preferred wine, the old beast failed to notice as the ground shook violently beneath him. His tongue lapped the marrow out of shattered thigh bone when the statue of his beloved god collapsed onto him, crushing his lower half and exposing his crimes. Countless little bones lay hidden inside the rubble. The vampire's pleas for help went unanswered, as he withered under the weight of his creation. The cannibalistic beast was at the mercy of the heavens. But his gods knew no kindness. He prayed between sheep-like bleats of anguish for a quick end. He begged for a piece of the cave to crush him to death, once the ground shook again. But no such salvation would come. Tears streamed down his sunken features as the waves rose with boiling fury, for he knew his god had abandoned him. The Old One desperately attempted to escape his punishment by throwing a stone at the cave ceiling, hoping it would fall on his head, killing him. And yet the forces above kept casting the stone away until it was too late, and the vengeful wrath of the gods brought down a deluge to pull the old ghoul and his blasphemous temple into the bottom of the abyss and away from sight. As the end of the month creeps closer, an unsettling reminder stirs in my mind. I've heard of this game before. It's the kind of thing that makes you question whether you should even attempt it. But here we are. So I'll lay it out for you. Why do I mention the end of the month? Because this ritual must be performed at night, on the last day, whether it's the 30th, 31st, or if you're unlucky, the 28th of February. Do you still want to try it? First, make sure you're in a calm state. If you're anxious, restless, or jittery, this won't work. And if you want to be sure, take a few moments to steady your breathing. Clear your mind. No distractions. Now, as night falls, open the window. Don't worry about the rain, unless it's pouring, in which case maybe reconsider. The air will feel cold, a little heavy. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes. Focus. Channel the presence. Don't rush it. Just feel it, like a shadow stretching over your skin. You'll know when you've done enough. Trust that feeling. Here's where the real fun begins. Lock the window. Draw the blinds and curtains. Get into bed. Don't even think about it. No phones, no lights, not a single movement. You'll wait. 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Then, it'll start. A light tapping. Almost imperceptible at first. Barely a brush against the window. But it won't stay that quiet for long. As the night wears on, it will grow louder, harder, and more insistent. The banging will be continuous, so violent, you'll think the glass might shatter, but only you can hear it. Do not be fooled. It will stop. You'll feel a lull, a brief silence that almost makes you believe it's over. It isn't. It's testing you, trying to see if you're really sleeping. If you're weak enough to move, stay still. Don't even twitch. If you fall asleep, well, that's unknown. You don't want to find out what happens if you wake up and break the silence. Apparently, no one gets to tell what happens if they move and look at the window. The only thing that will make it stop is the first light of dawn. When the sun creeps through your curtains, piercing the darkness, that's when, and only when, you'll know it's safe to rise from your bed. Congratulations. Wife, you've made it through the night. Good luck. I'll check in with my own update soon. Might take more than one attempt. My friend tried this, and he has some tips. Do not move. Do not blink. You are not alone. I'll update tomorrow. Wish me luck. UPED 8. I could hear this faint tapping. My body wouldn't move. I had posted this just to mess around after seeing it on YouTube. I didn't believe my friend when he warned me. Tears were streaming down my face. My bed's pushed up against the window and it was so loud. I closed my eyes shut as I thought my window was actually going to break. The next thing I know, my eyes are shooting open. My phone alarm was going off. I dreamt the entire thing and was glad, but still spooked because it felt real. Good old YouTube scaring me again like the good old days, lol. After a long drive, I sit on the sand, squinting in the harsh sunlight. The sound of kids playing and the seagulls' cacophonous squawking blend together over the rolling waves. Salt water and sunscreen sense the surrounding air around us. My dad and brother set up the umbrellas and chairs while I lounge. In the singular chair I set up. Yes, I know. I'm lazy. Oh hey, did you see that picture they got of the moon? Jeremy says. He drops the umbrella in a hurry to grab his phone. In doing so, he cuts his arm on the metal pole. Jesus, watch what you're doing, says my father. At least I'm doing something. Part of me feels guilty. But what am I to do? It's not my fault. He's always been a dumbass, and I've always been the favorite. Jeremy dusts sand off of the screen of his phone with his shirt. A goofy grin grows upon his face. I can tell he's excited to tell me something. I roll my eyes in anticipation. Says they found life. Can you believe it? Look at this. It looks human. Really weird. He shows me the picture on his phone. But it's in grainy black and white. It shares similarities with an ultrasound picture. Which makes sense. Funny. I guess babies resemble aliens when they're first born. Jeremy certainly did. No, it's not real. I retort. No, dude. It's from NASA. That can't be right. I say, come on, man. That even looks fake. You believe everything you're told. Last year you believed you spotted that skinwalker near Megan's house. I say, my nostrils beginning to flare. I did, he says. Whatever, I say, rolling my eyes. I want to enjoy the beach, not argue. Jeremy huffs, putting his phone back into the chair, stuffing it into his sandy shirt, and picks up the sunscreen. Despite the arguing at the store, he insisted we buy this new brand, this mineral sunscreen crap. See, Jeremy's gotten into a wacky mindset. Now he's worried chemicals and artificial shit are in everything. He won't buy any product if he doesn't scan it on this stupid app he bought. Yes, bought. I mean, who even pays for apps anymore? I digress. This stuff was odd. First, it was the color gray. Who'd ever heard of gray sunscreen? Second, it smelled of the ashes of a fireplace. If you had poured water on them, say 5 minutes ago. Real specific. I know. But that's the only way to describe that stench. Me. I refuse to use it. I'll stick to my harmful chemicals or whatever. Disgusted, I watch as he coats his body in this gray goop, mixing it with the sand that covers him. I can't help but laugh at how ridiculous he looks. As he reaches for his arm, he continues slathering the horrid concoction onto himself, not paying any mind to the gash he received. A few minutes earlier, he winces. Hey idiot, you have a cut there. You shouldn't start to put sunscreen on it. You should. I paused my words from the sight of pus pouring from Jeremy's wound. It's overflowing and has the texture of sea foam. What the fuck? Jeremy yells, as his skin bubbles and turns green. With no warning, his body swells, taking on the likeness of a bloated whale. I dart back, knocking my chair over violently in the process. Dad? I shoot my father a concerning glance. Before I can say any more, boiling hot green goo splashes onto my father. In an instant, it melts through him, leaving a smoking, gaping hole in his stomach. I'll never forget that final look on his face, of pure confusion and fear. Now in place of Jeremy, a ghastly green acid-like substance boiling through the sand. My own father lies slouched over in his beach chair, his charred entrails exiting the wound in his gut. Coming close to passing out, I managed to be saved by pure instinct. I knew if I stayed on that beach any longer, I'd be dead too. Unshakable urges to vomit overcome my body as I trudge forward in the wet sand. Puke plummets out of my mouth, covering the sand beneath my feet. I think about how disgusting this situation is. However, I lack the ability to do anything about it. The sounds of beachgoers screaming fills the air, drowning out the relaxing waves heard not too long ago. It's spreading. In the distance amongst the chaos, I spot a man screaming in the waves, jolting his arms. Only, where his arms should be, were pulsing red tentacles made out of his blood. I knew we should have stuck with the regular sunscreen. In my escape, I noticed one man who seemed unfazed, dressed in unassuming beach attire. But oddly enough, he appeared to be taking notes. As I ran, I caught his view. He raised his arm and pointed at me. I can see he's speaking to somebody, possibly on a headset. This caused me to sprint even faster. I made it off the beach, and am now sitting in the hotel room by myself, too shaken to even clean up myself. I tried to look up the mystery sunscreen brand, but found no results. Absolutely nothing. But it seems like something more. Did the other beachgoers use the same sunscreen too? That couldn't be the case. And what about the guy in the water? Oh God. I can still hear the screams. What the hell caused all this? My deep thoughts are interrupted by some commotion outside my room. I think someone's at the door. I panic. What am I to do? Have I seen too much? The knocks grow louder. There's no pattern to them. They're incredibly disjointed. Carefully, I creep towards the door. I peer through the keyhole. Oh God. On the other side is some sort of half-human, half-lobster hybrid. It's hideous to look at. Huge, black, beady eyes protrude from the otherwise human face. Long black claws bang up against the door. My worries grow worse as I spot something walking the hallway behind it. Or someone. That man from the beach. The one who seemed unfazed by it all. He was heading straight towards my door, talking to someone on an unseen headset. I weighed my options. What should I do? Fight? Run? Hide? I didn't have much time. I don't think hiding will work. This room is quite small. I paced to the window, searching for an exit. I got it. A fire escape. I yank the window to open it, but it won't budge. The pounding grows steadily louder. It sounds as if the door is about to break open. Sure enough, it did. The toe. Crunch. I watch as the creature collapses right before my eyes. A strange mixture of human and crustacean bodily fluids seeps to the ground. Shredded shell and flesh litter the floor. It's a ghastly sight. The creature's demise reveals what's behind it. That man from the beach. In his hand, he's holding some sort of weapon, like nothing I've ever seen before. Light smoke billows out of its chamber. Come with me. I'm not here to hurt you, the man says. Then, who are you? I say, backing away from the strange man. He did just save my life, but I still have a hard time immediately trusting him. Name Snack. I'm trying to clean up this mess. What the hell is going on? I'm afraid I don't have time to explain everything, but I'd still explain as much as I can. You were the only survivor on that beach. That thing was not the last of them. There will be more. It's been going to need your help. You need my help. Is there no one else? Like I said, you're the only survivor. What about those people? I saw you talking to someone on your headset. That's right. They're helping in different ways. They're not here. Where are they? The moon. What? Hey, look. I really don't have time to explain in detail. Okay, just follow my lead. He tosses me a weapon. The same kind he used to take down that lobster man. Just aim at your target and push that red button. After you fire, there will be a 60-second cooldown. Wow, I've never seen a weapon like this before. There's a lot you haven't seen. Before I can react, Max screams. I dart backwards as I see a hole erupting in his sternum. Green goop. Just like my dad and brother, he thuds to the floor with a thud, revealing something behind him. A writhing fleshy mass with a pinkish red hue. Several hundred pincers from its lumpy body. It's about the size of a car. White cloudy eyes sit in the center of it, underneath a tiny mouth filled with that awful green goo. It's getting closer. Thinking fast, I remember Mac's instructions before he met his demise. I push that red button quickly, causing the creature to split into several chunks. Unfortunately for me, that doesn't stop the thing. The hunks of flesh writhing and sprouting new limbs, continuously creeping towards me. I panic as I wait for the cooldown on my newfound weapon. It wouldn't be enough, I fear. I have to find another way. I scan my surroundings. The mini-spawn of that foul creature are faster than the larger version. I scan my surroundings. The cooldown ends. I reach down to Mac and grab the headset from his ear. I'm sorry, I whisper. No life in his eyes now. I point my weapon towards the window and fire. The glass doesn't shatter, it disintegrates. I can see the green goo forming in each of the creatures' mouths. I book it for the window. Scrambling for the now broken fire escape, I shimmy down it, turning around to see those creatures tumbling out of the window. A splash of goo just narrowly misses me, spilling to the pavement below. I watch as the spindly sacks of meat splat on the ground. The green substance spurts out of them as they land, creating holes in the asphalt. I quickly jump from the end of the fire escape, far away from the acidic monstrous remains nearby. All is not well when I hit the ground. However, off in the distance, thrashing about in the sand, is a whale, but no ordinary whale. Spider-like red tendrils seep from many of its orifices, its eyes protruding from their sockets, an arm's length long. Is my weapon even powerful enough to stop that thing? And God, what else is out there? I wish Mac didn't died. I can really use some help. I have a realization. The headset. Quickly. I put it on. Hello. Who is this? My name's Jonathan. I survived. Mac didn't. Yes, we're aware Mac died. His vitals are showing that. What happened? Well, this thing melted through him. Just like what happened to my dad and brother. Then, we're sorry, but you're on your own. We can't help you. Hey, wait, what am I supposed to do? This beach is overrun by horrible things. Soon the entire world may very well be infested. I'm sorry, but there's not much we can do for you. Godspeed. Wait, you're just gonna let me to die? Maybe I can help you. Max said I would be a big help. We're sorry. Plans have changed in light of new information. What do you mean? There's no time. Seriously, stop being so vague. I'm trying to help you guys. You cannot help us. We're in greater danger than you. I need to share something with you. Before doing so, let me preface. I want to make something very clear. I'm a Muslim, and as part of my faith, I believe in the existence of jinn, mythical beings made of smokeless fire. They are like the demons or ghosts spoken of in other traditions/folklore, but are very different when you understand the complexity of these entities. Some are benevolent, while others malevolent. They live on a plane beyond our perception, unseen by human eyes. Sometimes they can appear in our world, take on the shapes of animals, humans, or whatever they deem fit. The evil malevolent jinns feed off fear and filth, and thus are attracted to places with negative attachments and energy. They can even attach themselves to other people/animals, possessing them and tormenting them. But when they do materialize into our dimension, they cannot do it perfectly, limited thanks to our creator, Allah SWT. Every time a jinn takes on the form of another being, something's always amiss. A foot twisted backwards, a hand with an extra finger, a face that looks kind of familiar, but not quite right. There's always a flaw, always something that doesn't belong. I never thought I'd experience it myself, thinking that it was just some made-up folklore and stories we'd tell each other to get a good scare, until I finally did. And let me tell you, what happened to me that night wasn't just terrifying, it was deeply traumatizing. It was late, a typical night, and I was laying in bed scrolling through my phone, trying to fall asleep. My room is on the first floor of a 3-story house, facing the front yard. The night was cool and quiet, almost too quiet. I wasn't thinking about much, just trying to drift off to sleep. Then I heard it. Initially it was a cat, I presumed, yowling. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It's a sound I've heard before, stray cats fighting, in heat or mating, just being their usual noisy selves. But this was different. It was eerie. The yowling wasn't just a cat in heat. It was raw and desperate, a kind of noise that made your blood run cold from the sheer volume and intensity. The sound echoed through the night, tearing at the stillness. It seemed to be coming from right outside my window. I was irritated, annoyed more than anything, but I got up and went to the window to see what was going on. I was already too tired to deal with it, but curiosity got the best of me, so I peeked outside. Nothing. The street was empty, bathed in the dim light of the street lamp. No cat, no sound. Just the quiet, empty night. Ticked off since I couldn't find the source of the noise. I returned back to my bed, trying to shake off the weird uneasy feeling settling in my chest. The house was still once again. The ambient sound of crickets and cicadas melding into a cacophony, creating an eerie atmosphere. After tossing and turning for a while, I grabbed my phone and tried to focus on the screen, willing sleep to overcome me. But then it came again. Louder. This time. Closer. That same mind-numbing yowl. My patience was wearing thin at this point. Feeling my blood pressure rise, I groaned and got up, making my way back to the window. I was already tired and frustrated, so I was not in the mood to deal with whatever animal was causing this nonsense. But when I looked outside again, there was nothing. The yard was empty. The street lamp's light casted long shadows, distorting its shape, making it look like a dark, slender figure. It looked a little off-putting, but I knew it was just a trick of the light. There was no cat, nowhere to be seen. Eager to find the source of the intruding noise, so I can be at ease, I stayed by the window a little longer, scanning the shadows, waiting for the sound to reappear. But nothing. Absolutely nothing. I was starting to feel quite unsettled. The sound, though absent, seemed to reverberate in the air, ringing in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I forced myself to shrug it off. I turned off my phone, lay back down in bed and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would overtake me once again. And just when I thought I can finally rest, I heard it. Siege. Louder. More urgent this time. That same deafening yowling. But this time, the yowling sounded different. It sounded as if someone or something were trying their very best to imitate the sound of a cat yowling. To make things worse, adding to my growing fear, it sounded as if whatever was making that noise were right inside my room. I bolted up, my heart racing, my mind scrambled to make sense of it. How could whatever it was be inside my room? There was no way, but it was there. Faint but unmistakable. The sound was all around me, encompassing itself among the darkness of my room. I raced to the corner of my room, my hands shaking as I flicked on the light switch. In a daze, my eyes adjusting to the bright light. I noticed something immediately. The moment the light flooded my room, the sound had stopped. It went dead silent. The sound of the night breeze and crickets chirping in the distance all seemed to suddenly come to a halt. For example, in nature, whenever an apex predator is lurking, all animals nearby go silent. It was just like that. The sudden silence felt so wrong. It felt as if I were being watched by something that can see me but I couldn't see. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stand still, unable to move. I stand there frozen, staring into the empty room. Nothing. No cat. No yowling. Just pure silence. I began wondering if I was losing my mind. I left the light on the whole night. I didn't want to be in the dark again, mortified. I just stood there, staring at the corners of my room, while simultaneously staring outside my window. The only sound I could hear was my heart pounding in my chest. Every second felt like it stretched onto eternity. The air was thick with this feeling of dread looming over me, as though something was there watching me, waiting. 20 minutes passed maybe. 30, 40. I lost count, but nothing happened. I began to convince myself it had been nothing, just a trick of the mind. Since it was so late, I left the light on and sank back into bed. Finally, feeling exhaustion take over, I closed my eyes, willing myself to go to sleep. And I did. As I managed to fall asleep, I relaxed and eased a little bit, but it was short-lived. I found myself in a dream. A nightmare that felt like one of those dreams where you're reliving memory you had, but it was twisted and its events altered. I was running down a street. My street, but it was wrong. Everything was warped and distorted. The trees bent at odd angles. The shadows stretched too long. The sky looked odd, confused. Two is why I'm running. I looked behind me. I couldn't see anything, but I knew something was chasing me. I could feel it. The weight of it. The pure anger and hatred emanating from whatever it was. But I couldn't bring myself to look back again, giving in to my fear and my piquing curiosity. I couldn't take it anymore, so I glanced over my shoulder while sprinting at full speed. And there it was. An entity. It was enormous, darker than anything I had ever seen. Its form shifted and morphed like shadows dancing in the night. It was impossibly large, towering over me. Its eyes glowed a dark red, and I felt a cold rush of dread wash over me as it moved closer, its footfalls shaking the ground beneath me. I turned and ran as fast as I could, but it was gaining on me, getting closer and closer. I felt it come right up behind me, its breath on the back of my neck. It chuckled, a laughter low and guttural, echoing in the air. And then suddenly, everything went dark. My eyes adjusting to the darkness, I blink a couple of times before I see it, right in front of me. As the entity lunges at me, I try to shield myself, covering my face with my arms, but I suddenly get jolted back to reality, waking up, my heart racing, the alarm blaring in my ears. The room was slightly lit with the light of early dawn, the familiar sounds of the house around me, but something was wrong. I sat up, confused, still feeling the terror of the dream clinging to me, that creature or entity, whatever it was. It felt so real. And then I noticed it. The light I had left on the previous night was turned off, but what unsettled me the most was my window. I'd locked it the night before, right after the whole situation. With the yowling being inside my room, I was sure of it, but there it was, slightly ajar, as if someone had opened it up and hastily tried to close it. I froze. I couldn't explain it. My mind scrambled to make sense of it, but I couldn't. My heart pounded in my chest as I hurried to the window, closing it, locking it tight. But the feeling I had from the night before, the feeling of being watched, it never left. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I was distracted during work, unable to shake the thought of the nightmare, the terrifying visuals I had of that dark thing chasing me. Although it was a dream, I remembered its features so vividly. I knew something wasn't right. I tried to ignore it for the time being, and continued with the rest of my day. Coming back home after a grueling day of work, I was treated to an unexpected surprise. When I pulled into my driveway later that evening, I saw it. A black cat. It darted across the yard, fast, almost at an unnatural speed. I stopped and got out of the car, thinking I'd check on it. I didn't want to be paranoid, but something about that cat made me connect the dots. I felt quite off. I looked around and lo and behold, that cat was gone. Nowhere to be seen. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I went inside, still feeling very queasy about this whole situation. So I tried to distract myself with video games. And it did help a little, but the feeling of dread gnawed at me. It felt as if someone or something was just waiting, barely out of sight, stalking me. I went to bed early that night, hoping for the rest I couldn't get the night prior. But as soon as I felt myself nearing sleep, I heard it again, the same noise I heard last night. The cursed yowling, distant, faint at first, but after a couple of minutes it was louder. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to believe it was just some stray cat who was in heat that was hiding in someone's garage or something. But deep down, I knew it was no ordinary cat making that god-awful noise. Despite the yowling, I somehow managed to fall asleep, accepting whatever was out there was just a cat. However, as if on cue, I felt a sense of dread, unlike anything I'd had ever felt before. I awoke, immediately blinking rapidly to adjust my eyes into the darkness, trying to get up. I realized that I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, but it felt like something was pressing down on me. My body refused to obey. Panic arose in my chest as I struggled to move my limbs, realizing during the moment that I was having an episode of sleep paralysis. I began reciting an incantation in Islam called Ayatul Kursi. a prayer that gives whoever recites it a means of protection against malicious entities. I could only move my eyes, so I screamed the prayer in my mind. While reciting it, I slowly began regaining control of my body, and doing so, I was able to slightly turn my head, and I looked over to my window. There it was, the cat I had seen in my driveway when I came home from work today. The damned black cat who was at the center of all this blasphemy. It was sitting on the windowsill. The window was once agag and slightly ajar. Its eyes glowed the same dim red in my nightmare. Its yowling was a full-on screech now. It was practically screaming at me, but something was wrong, so terribly wrong. This was no ordinary cat. Its limbs bent at an odd angle, and something about its eyes just did not seem right. As I lock eyes with this creature in front of me, I freeze in terror as I watch its body contort and morph. I watched as its legs twisted and bent backwards, the sound of bones cracking and twisting filling my room. It was as if its bones had been rearranged, contorting in ways that no living creature can. The sight of it made me feel sick to my stomach, my skin crawling as I take in this insidious sight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell for help so badly, but I still couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, the cat did something impossible. It stood up on its two bent legs, and it smiled at me. The damn thing straight up looked at me and grinned, its feline features turning into something demonic. My heart stopped. I was frozen. It moved closer, its twisted limbs jerking, the unnatural movement sending waves of terror throughout my body. It was only a few feet away when it dropped back to all fours and began to morph. Its body stretched, the fur dissipating into darkness. The form of the feline was now gone, replaced by a void of emptiness, a mass of black energy that pulsated and rippled, its shape constantly morphing. And then I heard it. A voice. A ragged, deep-sounding voice that sounded guttural and ancient. It whispered in a strange dialect. The words sounded strange, foreign almost, but somewhat recognizable for me. Something between Urdu and a language I had never heard of before. It didn't matter though. All I cared about was getting out of this situation. The sound of its voice made my blood run cold. By this time I had finished reciting Ayatul Kursi and began regaining control of my limbs. Just as I was about to move without warning, the creature looks at me, its demonic grin dissipating into pure anger. It lets out an awful blood-curdling shriek and jumps out of the window, looking at me one last time before its body, twisting in the night, disappears into the shadows. I lay there, motionless, paralyzed. The terror clung to me like a second skin. I was dumbfounded. Did that really just happen to me? Am I safe after that? Will it come back for me again? These questions stuck with me a while after my encounter with that entity. I couldn't sleep that night, nor the night after. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that same presence, lurking just beyond my perception, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. As time passed, days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. But that strange cat never showed up again. Hopeful I wish it was gone for good. But I knew it was still out there, watching, waiting for me at my most vulnerable state. I realized that during that time in my life, I was at an all-time low. I wasn't very religious and often participated in a few illicit activities, including but not limited to smoking and drinking, having sex often with women who I wasn't married to, and just not having a nice clean home to live in. All things that these malicious jinns are attracted to. In the days that followed, however, things seemed pretty normal. A bit too normal, but every time I passed a reflective surface, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. Every time I closed my eyes in the dark, I felt the weight of unseen eyes violating me. The terror of what I saw, what I heard, never truly left. It clung to me like a second skin. And every night, as I try to sleep, I can sometimes still hear it. The faintest, most chilling yowl in the distance. Closer. Always closer. Never truly leaving me. The unseen, its beady red eyes watching, just waiting for me to make a mistake. It all started with a shaving cut. As the razor slid under my chin, gently removing a layer of shaving cream, my hand spasmed. I felt a tearing pain and watched in the mirror as a droplet of blood trickled down my neck, staining my shirt's white collar before I could find something nearby to dab it away. Perfect. Just fucking perfect, I grumbled, stomping out of the bathroom while unbuttoning the shirt I had on. The closet door wearily creaked open as I rammed my shoulder into it. My goddamned muscles are out to get me, I thought to myself, fuming like a smokestack as I rifled through my clothes, searching for a fresh button-down. Seemingly, my muscle spasms would wait for me to be doing something dangerous before they decided to rear their ugly head. They never appeared when I was just lazing on the couch or anything. Instead, shaving, cooking, and splitting lumber in the backyard were the common activities they liked to disrupt, ordered from least to most harm I could inflict upon myself if I made a mistake. There had been a lot of near misses in the past. A knife slice almost carving up my forearm, an axe swing just about flaying the right side of my calf, all on account of these random spasms. My spiteful tics, always out to get me. Fortunately, before I could be too late for work, I found a relatively stainless black polo at the bottom of a pile of shirts. My frustration waned, and I could think clearly again. I recognized that it was a childish belief. My muscles didn't have it out for me. No more than bumper-to-bumper traffic or a rainstorm on my birthday did, at least. That was the first time a spasm actually did get me, though. I chuckled softly, imagining myself bowing respectfully to a giant hand muscle, conceding to their hard-fought triumph. Returning to the bathroom, I placed a band-aid over the small cut on the edge of my jaw and threw on the cleanish polo, causing the last of my frustration to slip away. As I walked out the front door of my apartment, though, I started to feel a little uneasy about the injury. The cut didn't hurt. It didn't itch or bleed any more than it already had. I experienced something else with its creation, though. An impulse. Something floating through my mind that I had to suppress and contain, unexplainable and deeply distressing in equal measure. From the moment that razor unzipped flesh, I felt the urge to pull on the edges of the wound until it expanded across my jawline, bloody fingers ripping it wide open like a Ziploc bag. When I arrived at the chapel in my beat-up sedan, my unease had only worsened. I felt like hell. My attempts to hide it were no use too. Vicar Emilio could tell I was struggling the second I dragged myself through the chapel doors. "Are you feeling under the weather, Matteo?" he shouted from the other side of the room. A lie started bubbling up my throat, lingering briefly on my lips, but I pushed it back down into my chest like a bout of acid reflux. I simply couldn't in good conscience try to deceive the vicar. For a lot of reasons. First and foremost, he's a man of God, as well as my boss. Lying to Emilio jeopardized both my sanctity and my financial livelihood in one fell swoop. Not only that, but the man was just physically intimidating. Stood over 7 feet tall, with an exceptionally bulky physique for his advanced age and dark brown eyes like a timber wolf. Outright deception didn't seem advisable, but I could justify a lie of omission. I wasn't about to tell the vicar about my insane urge. Yes sir. I said, I'm feeling quite unwell. Nicked myself shaving this morning. Maybe its sit's become infected. I haven't sit in right since. A look of serious concern swept across his face. Before I knew it, the vicar had descended on me. His approach felt nearly instantaneous. I blinked, and in that time the man had moved 20 feet forward, his massive hand encircling the back of my neck, pulling my head to the side so that the injury was directly under one of the chapel's ceiling lights. Emilio tore the band-aid off and inspected the cut. Yes. Well, a regular band-aid won't fight. Do, Matteo. Let me give you something special. Special like what, sir? I asked, thoroughly perplexed by his alarm over what ultimately amounted to a glorified paper cut. I said, "I'll show you. I have a box of it in my office, a holdover from my days in the Peace Corps. Stay here. Sit down on a pew and rest." As he paced away, I followed his instructions and sat down. All the while, the strange urge screamed in my head, begging for me to rip and tear at the cut until I had skinned my head like an apple. I shut my eyes, clasped my hands tight while setting them against my forehead, and I prayed for relief which would not come. The vicar returned from his office with a square-inch piece of thick medical dressing. There was no brand name on the bandage, nor were there any adhesive strips to peel off. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, truth be told. Emilio held it over the cut, making sure it covered the injury's contours completely. Then, he put the bandage up to his mouth and licked one side of it, firmly dragging his blue-purple tongue from top to bottom, before I could protest. The vicar slapped the material over the wound. Then, he pushed down hard. And I mean hard. It felt more like the man was punching my neck in extreme slow motion, rather than applying careful pressure to an injury. To my surprise, whatever special bandage Emilio used seemed to work wonders. For the cut itself, sure, but also for unexplainable impulse. Right before the bizarre dressing made contact, though, the urge became exponentially louder, almost uncontrollable. Once the spongy material was secured over the laceration, however, I felt the terrible impulse wither. It wasn't gone completely, but it was certainly better. The material seemed to cover the wound as well as cauterize my mind. After about 30 seconds, the vicar moved his hand away and massaged the muscles of my neck, which were a little sore from the forceful application, and noticed something peculiar. Somehow, the bandage had already fused with the nearby skin. That night, lying in bed, I found myself running my fingertips over where the cut had been, trying to determine what exactly the material was. Eventually I drifted off to the sleep, still tracing the perimeter of where the vicar had installed special dressing, even though I couldn't feel the edges of it anymore. It was like Emilio had grafted the bandage over my cut. At the time, that didn't make any sense. But before the sun rose the following morning, I would understand completely. For better or for worse, a jolt of intense pain caused my eyes to burst open. Initially, I thought I was still dreaming, but as waves of pain crashed down my neck, like a rising tide slamming against the hull of a ship, I became very much aware that I was no longer asleep. I came to standing up. Like I had been sleepwalking, I was in my kitchen, and the taste of copper lurched over the tip of my tongue as I oriented to my surroundings. In one hand, I held a meat cleaver stained with gore. The other held a patch of newly excised skin with frayed and ragged edges, draping lazily over my knuckles like a tan handkerchief. Apparently, I had given in to the urge in my sleep when my defenses were at their lowest. With panic surging through my body, I sprinted towards my bedroom, my socks slick with warm blood, squeaking over the wooden floor as I moved. When I approached the nightstand, I reached my right hand out to pull my phone from the wall charger, but I was still holding the cleaver, and no matter how much I willed it, my hand wouldn't release the blade. Instead, the muscles contracted with a ferocity I had never experienced before. In the past, they had just been isolated spasms. Now, the alien movements felt decidedly purposeful. My hand thrashed like a caged animal, swinging the cleaver closer and closer to my body in small but powerful arcs. Thankfully, I successfully retrieved my phone with my left hand, which had discarded the patch of neck skin at some point earlier in the commotion. Another jolt of searing agony exploded through my body, this time originating from my right thigh. Despite my efforts to dodge the swipes of my spasming hand, the cleaver had connected with the flesh below my groin and was scraping downwards, slowly peeling away a second chunk of skin. This time off my leg. I howled from the pain, and the sound reverberated off the walls of my tiny apartment, right back into my ears, causing my head to throb. My blood-stained hand dialed 911 as the cleaver kept digging through the meat of my upper leg. As the line rang, I was finally able to win some control back of my right hand, pulling the blade out from my skin and slightly away from my body. The malevolent spasms calmed, and I released my grip on the handle, causing the cleaver to fall to the floor. Still waiting for someone on the other end of the call to pick up, I examined my injuries. There was a diamond-shaped wedge of detached skin hanging by a thin thread off of my leg, revealing something underneath. In that moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. I expected to see gallons of blood spurting from the damaged tissue, but there was barely any blood at all, nor was there any muscle or bone. Instead, there was another layer of intact skin. Midway down my thigh, I saw a black and white tattoo of a paper lantern, newly visible only after the cleaver had dug through a considerable amount of flesh. Confusion pulsed through my skull like a second heartbeat. I had never been tattooed before. Hello? Mateo? The call had finally picked up, but somehow, I hadn't reached a 911 operator. Vicar Amelia was on the other line. Amelio. I need you to call Ivor. My hand shot to the floor with the speed and precision of a hawk, grasping the cleaver's sticky handle tightly, blade end pointing towards me. Before I knew what was happening, the extremity swung up through the air, only stopping once it had buried the cleaver into my forehead. And then, it pulled down, over the bridge of my nose, my chin, my Adam's apple, so on and so on, split me nearly in half. But I didn't die. When I fell, not all of me fell, either. It's difficult to put into words, but I'll do my best. Maybe unzipped me is a better way to put it. From the floor, my vision became nauseatingly distinct. One eye could see into the bedroom, and the other could see down the hallway, but the images didn't mesh with each other. They weren't cohesive. Where one started, the other abruptly ended. An impossible 360-degree panoramic view of my apartment. Then, the eye that pointed towards the hallway saw a bloody foot come down inches away from its vantage point, followed by a second foot, 2 legs, and eventually a whole person, coated in a thick blanket of red-brown coagulation. The figure plodded down the hallway, frequently stumbling as it moved. As they were about to round the corner, there was a deafening crash from somewhere ahead of them, accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. The crimson phantom let loose a coarse and boggy scream. It spun around as fast as it could, terrified of whatever had made the noise. The figure had no hope of escape, however. They could barely coordinate their limbs enough to trudge down the hallway, let alone outrun what was rapidly approaching behind them. Vicar Emilio. But in a different, more predatory form. His arms and legs were the same length, and both were easily 3 feet long. His head was elongated as well, about half the length of his extremities. The back of Emilio's neck and skull rested against the ceiling, because my apartment couldn't accommodate his unnatural proportions if he fully stood up. He grasped the blood-caked figure's head with one hand and held them in place. Then, his other hand stretched down the hallway, slithering like a viper until it grabbed onto me. My husk slid against the floor as the vicar dragged me towards the person who had been trapped inside the confines of my body only a few minutes prior. The nameless man with the lantern tattoo. In a few quick movements, Emilio sheathed me over the figure like plastic wrap over a gingerbread man when he needed more skin to patch up or seal a particular area. Extra skin grew from the center of his chest in the shape of a score, at which point he would tear a piece off and apply it where he needed to. The figure's gurgled screams died down as he became progressively more entombed inside me, eventually going silent completely once I had been fully reformed. You might be asking yourself why I'm posting this, and the answer is actually pretty simple. He asked me to. As it turns out, nearly everyone in a 10-mile radius is just like me. A fleshy extension of the vicar, with someone else trapped inside. Emilio himself cannot reproduce. This is his alternative. Some of us know what we are. Some of us don't. So, here's what the vicar has instructed me to pass along. He's been here for a few months, and already there's thousands of us. It's death's only a matter of time. Please don't resist, like the man with the lantern tattoo when your time comes. Accept your sleep like erasure with dignity. We can all be the vicar's children. In fact, you may already be one. You just don't dare know it yet. Your deal, the sharp-dressed man uttered, swallowing the last bit of his brown drink. Sharp-dressed couldn't begin to describe this man's fit, as the newer generation would denote. A classic 3-piece suit isn't something you see every day, especially from a man around the age of 40, and also, especially in a small town in the Midwest. Sharp-dressed indeed, a double-breasted burgundy vest under a single-breasted burgundy jacket, curiously finished with a white pair of trousers and matching white dress shoes. Okay, dealer's sit's choice, right? Max asked. A silent nod from the sharp-dressed man affirmed. Texas Hold'em it is then. I've enjoyed learning your fancy card games, but I'd like to get into something simpler, something I actually understand. Be my guest then, Maximilian, the sharp-dressed man said, with an open smile, a smile that could seemingly melt ice. Max dealt one card to his opponent, one to himself, one more to the man across from him, and the next finishing out his hand. The room they were playing in could have been a set from an old noir-style movie, a back room of sorts, with shelves lining the walls, occupied with backstock of assorted liquors, beer and wine. A small section of non-perishable groceries took up space behind him. A sink sat in the corner, perpetually dripping, not like a kitchen or bathroom sink, but one that represented more of a basin that was used for collecting water from a washing machine. Curious, a circular table rounded with what once could have been an expensive wood surrounded a green felt, aged by years of housing card games, holding excess items and discarded trash that couldn't find another home. The light above seemed to barely illuminate the small space. It was as if it was meant to just give enough light to be specific to whatever circumstances needed to play out for this event. Max looked at the sharp-dressed man before checking his cards in a clandestine manner. The man seemingly never let his suspicious smile falter, all while maintaining a visual on him. Creepy, as he had a tinted pair of dark glasses that made it impossible to see any semblance of his pupils. Even creepier being that this windowless room warranted wearing any type of ocular sunglass wear. Unreal, Max thought to himself. 2 queens, I'll bet, the sharp-dressed man said, throwing in 5 blue chips. Max couldn't help but let a little humorous air from his nostrils. Amused, the man asked. Max once again met the gaze of his opponent. I suppose you could say that, friend. Max couldn't straight remember how long they had been tossing cards back and forth, but at this point he had a sizable chip advantage compared to the sharp-dressed man. I sit or call. Max dealt the flop. First card, 4 of hearts. Second card, 6 spades. And the third card, another queen. Max, now aware he had to put on that classic poker face, awaited the man's move. The sharp-dressed pondered, effortlessly flipping chips in his right hand while his left glided through his jet-black hair. Another 5. Max hid his growing excitement. Now his heartbeat starting to elevate ever so slightly. The sharp-dressed man nodded, raising his eyebrows in an all-right let's play expression. Max burned 1, throwing down the turn, 8 of spades. Looking pretty good for old Maximilian, without a word or hesitation. The man doubled his bet from the previous turn. Max, a bit cautious, but growing with confidence, raised just enough to try to keep his opponent in the game. Let's try to get everything I can out of him on this hand, and not scare him into folding, he gleefully thought. Max tried to read him, without success. Call, the sharp-dressed man said. Throwing in the appropriate bet, Max nodded, now realizing that if he won this hand with his trip queens, he would take a sizable stack of chips away and be on his way to finishing this game. Max hadn't realizing how much he was sweating. Hopefully his black Nike tracksuit hid the perspiration. Okay, sir. Here comes the river. Max burned 1 final card, and slowly revealed the last card, a 3 of clubs. This couldn't instead have gone any better than a first hand of Texas Hold'em. Absolute trash on the board. And he clearly has no idea that I have pocket queens. Max started to silently count the chips he was going to a tie. All in. What, he just wants to give me his money. Must want to end this game early. I'm happy to oblige. Call. The man put his hands out, palms up. Well, let's turn them over then. Cool as ever, the man smiled at Max. Here you go, my man. Max laughed, revealing his 2 pretty queens, joining the one on the board. The night had been long, and had had a lot of ups and downs for him, losing, almost out, and now climbing back from the absolute brink of defeat. Clever. It seems you were ahead the whole time, eh? The sharp-dressed man stated, with that confident energy never waning. At that, he unveiled his hand, a 5 of clubs and a 7 of hearts. Straight beats a 3 of a kind. I'm afraid. The man, not gloating, but more matter of fact, started retrieving his winnings. Shit. How did I didn't think you had anything. Why would you go all the way with that hand? A 5-7? No one would play that. Max was now left with a racing heart, and no joy to accompany it. His once stack of chips resembling a mini New York skyline, now reduced to a main street of 2 or 3 houses. Sometimes the most unexpected outcomes come from the most dire of circumstances, my boy. The man finished stacking his reward, noticing Max was now smiling, looking down at the table. Something to share, Max? He asked curiously. Haven't thought about this in a while. Max laughed. First time ever I went to Las Vegas. I moved to California as a young 20-something, trying to make it, you know. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Had no idea what I was up against going out to such a foreign environment. I moved in with a friend that just happened to move out there a year or so earlier. So at least I had that. The sharp-dressed man crossed his legs and threaded his fingers, getting comfortable, taking in Max's reminiscing. At the time it seemed like nothing but struggle. We had no money and worked the most menial jobs just to afford the astronomical California rent. Looking back though, we sure had a good time. And that will never be taken away from me, or any one of us. As we age, you know. Anyway, a work associate of my friend's surprised us by driving us to Las Vegas. The nearly 4-hour drive through the desert was all forgotten when that amazing, iconic skyline appeared. This was when the World Series of Poker was getting popular on television. ESPN of all places was broadcasting it nearly 24 hours. I only wanted to see one place, Binion's, the home, at the time, of the World Series of Poker, and I did. Being so green, I bought into a limit hold-in game. No idea what I was doing. My first and only hand I was ever dealt in Vegas was the very one I dealt tonight, pocket queens. And I lost in the exact same way. Didn't see the sneaky straight. The sharp-dressed man uncrossed his legs and leaned forward. So what was the lesson there, young man? No lesson. Just a funny coincidence that I have forgotten that memory, and even funnier that I have been reminded in this way. There steps a lesson in nearly everything, Max. Take that as a lesson, the sharp-dressed man said as he flashed another sharp grin. So, overall, you enjoyed your time there, and came back a better man, Max. Shuffling now for the next game. Stopped, pondering. I suppose the regret and failure of not making it out there outweighs the enjoyment. I don't know. Deal, my boy. We can play another round of this Texas game. I quite like it. It sits most unlike the ones we played tonight. Max looked up, mid-shuffle. Sush, you said played Holden before, right? The way you say that sounded a little odd. The sharp-dressed man unbuttoned one of the infinite buttons on his vest. I said played all games, Max, but this one is a new one to me. I said I'm excited to give it another go. Max furrowed his brows. Well then, how the hell did you even know that you won? How did you know anything? You just let me deal, and kept making bets. Max threw his head back, laughing harder than he had remembered laughing for a long, long time. You're messing with me. I got to stop underestimating you. The man took a long pull from his brown drink. Max wasn't sure how many drinks that makes it tonight. I guess he hadn't noticed all night, when or if he was drinking at all. Usually being sober was the only way Max played any type of game of chance. Heavier odds on the chance. Okay. ZZ Top. One more round of poker, so I can take the rest of your money and get out of this place. Sharp-dressed man extended his right hand toward the table, tapping it twice. This game started on a polar opposite position than the first. Upon gingerly checking his 2-hole cards, Max came up with a measly 2-7, statistically the worst hand in poker, despite a strong bluff through the flop, just to see if he came up with any lucky pairings. He did not fold. Well, that one wasn't as much fun, the sharp-dressed man said, trying to feign sadness as he raked in a couple extra chips to add to his growing empire. 2 more games being played. 2 more rounds where Max lost. Max, now starting to lose confidence, sized up his and his opponent's money situation. Looks like you're catching up quick. It's your deal. What's the game? Max leaned back. Now, taking in his surroundings, Max was perplexed. Where exactly was he? The room was familiar like a memory, but like a memory that has been eroded in your brain after thinking of it thousands of times over your short life. A game of telephone where every time you try to recall, the details get changed in the most minuet of ways. Maximilian. The man waved at him. Max's eyes stayed transfixed at the sink. Snapping didn't seem to break him from his trance. Visual and audio no good. Maybe something tactile. What the fuck? Max shook his head, feeling a cold liquid now dripping down into his mustache and lips. Did you fucking throw your drink on me? Max stood up and locked onto his opponent. Fire and confusion started to rush through his veins. Oh. Sit down, Maximilian, the man said, and Max sat, not entirely on his own volition. Max wiped his face, looked at the sink, and then back at the man in the burgundy suit. I had to snap you out of whatever that was. Are you okay, son? Do you want to continue? The sharp-dressed man kept that devious smile. Is that amaretto? Are you seriously drinking amaretto? Max had only had the almond-flavored liqueur once in his life. Once was enough. I am, young man. What a refined palate to recognize a you. Not so common drink. Ugh. Reminds me of my college days. Taking one more look at the sink, he continues. My college career was another major failure in my life. I started out strong but succumbed to the party life. Same old story. It's hardly unique. Before I knew it, I was on academic probation and dropped out after my junior year, saddled with debt and nothing but a handful of fuzzy late-night memories. I was back at my parents' house, except I came back with something I didn't leave with. Besides the debt, I accumulated an impressive appetite for alcohol, starting with an unassuming night with my 2 roommates. I was still under legal drinking age. My roommate Jared had recently turned 21, and for whatever reason, he came back to our dorm on Thursday, the Friday of the college kids' calendar, with a bottle of amaretto. We didn't know what we were doing. We all took turns banging shots down, like the amateurs we were. Last thing I remember saying out loud was that this wasn't doing anything, and then the night slipped into darkness. That sits it, the sharp-dressed man said. Did you hurt anyone or do something regretful? No, nothing like that. Honestly, if I did, I can't remember. That drink just brings back that memory. Something I haven't thought about in a long good while. Max sat back, almost defeated. The night shifted from a fun round of card games into an unpredictable minefield. Cheer up. The night is still young, and there's plenty of good to still go around. I see you haven't been drinking tonight. That has to be good. No. Now the sharp-dressed man in a burgundy 3-piece suit leaned forward, studying Max, looking through him like his dark-tinted glasses had X-ray vision. I don't think I could drink. Even if I wanted, I feel... well, doesn't matter how I feel, but no. To answer your statement and/or question, I haven't taken a drop in years now. Jolly good. So, you do learn from your past. Let's get back to the game. My choice. Have you ever played Go Fish? If Max was drinking at the moment, he would have surely spit it out. Go Fish. Of course I played. Everyone in the US with a pulse and a childhood has played. Sure, let's play. But I played. Never bet money playing. How do we wager? No money for this game. How about this? If I win, you tell me another one of your regretful stories, which you seem to have a lot of, and if you win, I shall tell you one of mine. Deal, Max, more intrigued by the minute. Agrees. Do you have any 7S? The man asks. Max, staring at his last 3 cards, wipes his brow, looks at the man, and sits back for a moment, after further hesitation, not taking his eyes off his cards, even though he can feel the red-hot, smiling gaze from his opponent, meekly slides 1 7 of hearts out of his hand. Ah, excellent, the sharp-dressed man says, taking the card. This is the most animated he's been all night. Do you have any aces? Max stares at his last 2 bicycle cards. The ace of spades almost radiating. Go fish. Max almost whispers. Oh, Max, I'll give you that one. But remember that. The sharp-dressed man grabs a card from the deck, adding to his sizable hand. Max hopes his opponent doesn't notice the beads of sweat appearing on his forehead, sweat that he doesn't fully comprehend. Do you have any 2 sips? Go fish. Oh, come on. All those cards and you don't have a 2. Just like life. Max, you have to keep count of where you're at. Up or down. Ahead or behind. Don't question again. The tone changes dramatically. It's like the scene in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy goes from black and white to Technicolor, but in reverse. And if The Wizard of Oz was a horror movie, Max clears his throat and wishes for the first time he did have that drink in front of him. Max grabs a card. Do you have any 2 fits? How did he know I just grabbed a 2? He knew beyond a doubt I didn't have 1 in my 2 remaining cards. I just asked for 1. Yes, I do. The sharp-dressed man guessed correctly. To cleanly win out, Max stood up, pacing behind his spot at the table. Relax, Max. It sits. Just a game. Now I believe my prize is another tale. A tale of your choice. Care to share? Not like you have a choice. Yeah, sure. A better bet. Something ominous is coming. The night of seemingly no-risk card games has transformed into what feels like a game of life or death. In my last job, I was in charge of a team of men and women that controlled the fates of a lot of financial interests. I'll just leave it at that. Even though I was in charge, I was really just in middle management when a lot of money went missing. I decided poorly. I decided to lie for my people. Instead of telling the truth and maybe getting out with a slap on the wrist, my ego took over. And I thought I could lie my way out of it. They didn't ask me to do it. It was completely my own decision, and it was the wrong decision. This cover-up didn't just have to do with people's money. It had to do with people's lives. What these people's money funded, powerful people, was so horrible it would make what the most deplorable Roman emperors did seem like they were running a daycare. The sharp-dressed man leaned back, more than jubilant with this admission of guilt. The worst part, and I don't know why I'm even telling you this, was that I didn't give a fuck at all. I could care less about what those people did. I got paid, and that's all that mattered to me. I just wanted to save my own ass. I did try to save my people from any further problems, but I was always my first priority. I guess I care now. I don't know. It's not fair. It's just not fair. All I've ever done is fail and come back. I never meant this to happen. It's just not fair. It doesn't matter if you didn't mean it. It doesn't matter if it is not fair. There's possibly nothing you can do now. Being dead. If I could change things, I would. I would. You're dead, Max. What's done is done. Fairness has no meaning here. The sharp-dressed man takes a sip, places the goblet down, and removes his dark-tinted glasses. Black eyes, with a smoldering red pupil, greets Max. Max searches, but cannot grasp any words, let alone comprehension. So, I said, Yep. The man stands up, throwing his remaining card into the middle of the table. You stirred done like dinner, my boy. So, does that mean you said death? The impossibly small room closes in, like it's being pushed on all sides by the world's strongest men. Breath is getting sucked out from Max's lungs to the point of near suffocation. Relax. Death coos, assuredly. She, relax. You can still breathe. You have control still. For now. The dark tunnel that was closing in on Max slowly relents, revealing a light he'd not yet seen. A light bulb casting into what looks like a very short corridor. Wait. Is this the wine dock? Max, in a lucid remembrance, asks Death. The small back room they've been dueling in for what he now knows has no time. Opens. Well, yes. Yes, it is, Maximilian. You recognize the front of the store? Ria's been behind it the whole time. The site of your first job, stocking shelves at the wine dock, the town general store. Unreal. Max was only 16 when he started, a memory that is as faded as a well-worn pair of jeans. But everyone should remember their first job, right? I know. This is a lot. It always happens like this. Your memory doesn't still work the same after you. Sev. Recently, Dada ceased. Wait. I had so much to do. I had people I cared about. Stop, Max. It's okay. I know you have questions. It'll all be answered. Let's play one more game while we're waiting. Death proposes. As far as this process goes, Max has taken this quite well. Death's least favorite part of this is the questions. The unknowing. Death is just it. He's final. She's final. They don't get the why part. They just do. What do you say, my boy? One more game. And hey, depending on how this goes, I'd full let you ask me anything you want, and maybe a follow-up or two, depending on how you do. But you can ask me how you died. That's not my department. Max, taking labored, deep breaths, doing his best to stifle emotion and tears, complies. My deal. Death sits back down, straightening his burgundy suit. He motions with his right hand toward the empty folding chair that Max once occupied. Max, again complies. One hand, high-low. Are you familiar? You know I am. Death answers, now getting to finally drop the facade of ambiguity. Good. Max, seeming to comprehend his mortality, or recent mortality, sits down with the determination of a tour de force competitor. I am dealing 2 cards. You get 1, I get 1. Whoever has the highest card wins. Comprehend. Death nods. Okay. Max shuffles, flips, and cuts the deck. Placing the cards on the table, he thinks for just a second. Would you like to cut the deck? He asks. Death. Death waves his hand. Card dealt to Death. Card dealt to Max. This is the last moment before boarding, the last smoke before you get on the plane. You can see the cards. Why are we even doing this? Max asks. Because all you humans love games. Even if they're not fair, you still play. We've decided it's one of the only things you people can mostly agree on, so we do this before you move on to the next station. I know what my card is. I know what yours is. But I have no play in dealing. You dealt, so look at your card. Max tosses his card on the table, barely caring. Not convinced this whole thing isn't entirely rigged. A red ace. Can I do much better than that? Death says with that signature smile. Guess it sists on me, huh? With that, putting an end to this painful night, he turns over an 8. You win, Max. You bested Death. Good fun, old man. Time to pack up. A dead Sib's man hand. If we were playing poker. Clever. Max weakly says. Now for my question. Death. Buttoning up his suit. Pushing his chair in. Stops. Oh yes. I did say you could ask me a question. Fair is fair. Last request and all. Ask away, Max. Can we play one more game? No one sits asked that. Why would you want to delay this? Come on. Let's get this over with. The sharp-dressed man, formerly in burgundy, melts into an impossibly dark shade of obsidian. Don't make me go all traditional with the sickle. And all, it sets just one more game. We set her in a purgatory, correct? And I sets completed it. In some weird way with these games, admitting to my biggest regrets, if set not ready to face wherever that train is going next. Death, putting his hood up, obscuring the once human-looking face, pauses. Damn it, Max. I hate the ones that don't want to go so much. Fine. One more game. What would you like to play? I now have a good idea of how I got here. It was by choice. A choice that once again, I chose wrong. One more game of chance. One more opportunity to prove I deserve this. Death continued to stare. The hood now covering anything, revealing a face. The temperature was rapidly trending upward. I promise I won't say to stall any longer for what I said have done. What I said have allowed those people to do, all in the name of greed. I deserve this. One more game. Death taps the table. One last time. Max takes his place, shuffles, and looks Death right in the face. Go fish.